Copyright frequency 99. Imprint frequency 99. Ocala, Florida, USA. All rights reserved. This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to actual events or persons, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. Chapter 1: Thunder. The Armada rolled in on a cloud of rumbling rage, auditory booms firing as ships entered the atmosphere, moving at great speeds that needed to be slowed. It was a fleet of Oldtech, ancient Abraxian ships built for destruction, designed to cause fear in those they pursued. The enemy war fleet had been visible in the sky over Alethea for several days, approaching from the outer planets in battle formation. Scouts were sent ahead. There was no concern for stealth or surprise. The few skirmishes were demonstrating the lethal capabilities of the swarm, the fighting contingent of the Abraxian military. Logan stood on a hilltop, the wind blowing across his large metal frame. He was a combat android, retrofitted with modern weaponry. His armor, glinting in the early morning light, was shiny from the new upgrades. He looked up into the sky, watching the enemy fleet advance. If it were possible for an android to stand resolute, he was doing precisely that. Strongly silhouetted against the clouded sky, E7, an ethereal advanced automation, stood with him. The wind was whipping around her combat armor as well, blowing cold snow across the barren landscape. She watched the sky too, counting the ships, worried about the numbers of the enemy forces sent to kill them all. She concealed her newly discovered human-like emotions, the result of Oldtech used several months ago at the final enemy facility before its destruction. Something had awakened in her. As had been discovered, Series 7 ethereals like her were a combination of highly advanced cybernetics and human consciences, combined to create the next level of android. It was possible to recover your human memories using Oldtech. She had not done that, but X7 did, and just being near him brought out human traits in her that she would have preferred remained undiscovered. She looked up and counted 24 of the Abraxian Oldtech ships so far. Frigates and gunships were dropping into the atmosphere and advancing on the base near the center of the large plateau. Dark, mean-looking ships, with green and yellow energy dancing about them, their frequency drives humming ever louder as the ships transitioned to their atmospheric propulsion. There were 4 well-organized battle groups of 6 ships, arrayed into straight lines, hanging heavy in the sky. E7 gave a signal, indicating the airborne ships. Logan looked down at her, then back up at the enemy armada. He could see small sparks firing under several of the ships. This would be the in-atmosphere jets and thrusters of their shock troops dropping from underneath, quickly matching the gravity and advancing. Black armored swarm soldiers. Several had been captured over the past half-dozen days in the skirmishes. They were impervious to interrogation, akin to soldier ants, their only desire to fight for their queen or do whatever else they were ordered to do. No unique personality, no unique combat intelligence to be farmed for information under questioning or distress, no matter how intense. Logan opened a peer-to-peer connection to Odessa, his sister, and the 15,000-strong planet-based clan leader. All refugees were rescued from the 9 facilities on Alethea, the 3rd planet from the Luminary. They are dropping their shock troops. Get ready, Logan alerted her. Acknowledged, Odessa's voice rang in over the connection. You were right. They are going to try and recapture the people we freed from their facilities. I was worried they were just coming here to kill us. Logan kept watching the sky, getting ready to react as they had planned. They need the people for food. If they can't retake them, they will have to attack one of the outlying colonies. For whatever reason, it seems they want to keep what they are doing quiet, hence the deal with the governments of the 5 moons. Odessa and Logan knew some of what was going on, but not everything. They could piece together information retrieved from a few sources. They had learned that an ancient, evil race flourished in the luminary system long ago, fading away to the outer planets and going into hibernation for the past 1,000 years, enabling a new civilization to emerge, one of 5 moons orbiting the giant ice planet Taio. When the Abraxians re-emerged 100 years ago, a great war was fought. Still, it was kept secret from the people of the 5 moons, and instead, truth-tellers spun lies about internal strife and renegade military leaders. The councils of the 5 moons were corrupt. They made a secret deal out of fear and an inability to work together. They called it a great resolution. In exchange for benevolence, they agreed to allow their citizens to be eaten as food, sending them away while having the truth-tellers spin more lies as cover. Part of the council's agreement was disarming all people and ships, or at least centrally controlling all of the weapons in every ship. You had to request access to activate a weapon, making immediate responses for defense difficult. This ensured compliance and the ability to neutralize dissenters. All people and everyday things in the luminary were connected to the ether. This self-regulating grid allowed communications using the fabric, technology embedded into people and machines that communicated directly with the ether. Logan and Odessa were forced to disconnect from the ether and rework their basic communications arrays to avoid it or be easily monitored and discovered. Logan responded to Odessa's concern about the attack. "I'll bet you even money that if we put up enough of a defense, they will switch tactics." "Let's hope it comes to that," Odessa returned. "We have the modified shield up. We're ready." There were now thousands of swarm troopers in the air in various combat formations, moving to the front of the ships. Logan could see the newly built base far in the distance, the swarm's ultimate goal. He could see the blue, glowing shielding, retrofitted mining technology, creating a bubble over the top of the tall pyramid structures. Logan was becoming anxious, an odd trait for a combat robot, but very much part of his personality. "Just confirming, you still want us to wait?" The strategy they put together was to see if the defensive shielding was enough to protect the base. If it were, they reasoned there was no need to fight a war of attrition and expend valuable resources if they could simply remain safe from the enemy fleet. If they could force the Abraxians to spend time and resources to break through the shield, including weapon ammunition and armaments, all the better. Obviously, a conflict was inevitable, but there was no reason to rush into things while the enemy was fresh. The flying swarm shock troops started to make strafing runs at the shielding, firing small arms and combat weapons. They were coordinating their attacks, targeting specific points on the large glowing blue barrier. The air filled with the low hum of the frequency drives. The swarm fleet was advancing again. Logan watched, growing increasingly impatient, both at the wait to attack and the delay in Odessa's response. He looked over to E7, prepared to ask her to open a comm channel to X7, her ethereal peer back at the base. X7 had been combat prime for a while and had demonstrated acute abilities to organize and coordinate an attack. The ethereals could communicate directly over the peer-to-peer network, outloading and cross-loading data in real time with each other, the clunky necessity of audible speak not needed for pure electronic data exchange. But he paused, remembering that X7 had not recovered from the usage of the Oldtech machine months ago. They had been forced to deactivate him, again, as he seemed to have suffered some type of mental alteration. So instead, E7, can you open a comm channel to X4 and see what's going on? Odessa is not responding to me. X4 was a mid-model ethereal, highly advanced and capable, but still, in the end, just a machine. I believe the Abraxian ships are jamming our communications, E7 returned after just a moment of processing. Gax, Logan said out loud. When I met with him, he must have been able to detect we were using the peer-to-peer signals and pass that information on. Now they are jamming everything. This could create a huge problem as the several thousand combat androids positioned around the area, their primary fighting force, poised for a counterattack, now could not receive the order to attack from him. Logan tried to contact the combat androids and could not. The jamming was flooding out of the ships and successfully dampening all communications. Chapter 2: Shielding. In the Combat Information Center, CIC, Odessa paced back and forth, a large room filled with view screens and technology built to one side of a massive underground hangar. She wore her combat armor and had her helmet off. Aaron and Jace, the two brothers, were similarly dressed, wearing their newly fitted combat armor with their helmets on the large conference table in the middle of the room. They had been in training with Odessa over the short time they had to learn how the armor worked and develop the ability to use it in a fight. Katine was not wearing armor, but instead dressed in her medical outfit. She had not trained on Machi in the medical arts, but had gravitated to the position through sheer demand. Someone had to do it. She was as capable as anyone. Franklin was also there, their tech prime. He maintained the combat androids and worked to integrate the different layers of technology they had acquired through the facility raid and old ship salvages. Finally, there was Kara. She was smaller than everyone else and younger, but not a child by any stretch. She wore her custom-fitted combat armor, but looked out of place in it. She had failed all of her combat training. She was more suited as an apprentice to Franklin, more adept with the technology than a combatant, but these were desperate times. Odessa stopped pacing and turned to Franklin. "I've lost the frequency signal with Logan." She was tense, somewhere between angry at Franklin, not knowing if this was a systems failure, and frustrated with the enemy if this were their doing. Franklin rolled a chair between two terminals and adjusted a few devices, changing a few of the small screens near him. "They have discovered our peer-to-peer subnetwork. They're interfering with it, modulating the carrier waves so that the wave dissipates after just a short distance." Everyone looked from Franklin back to Odessa. She walked over to the control system near him. He pointed to one of the screens. "How far is the signal going?" she asked after nodding at the display. "It's not getting past their fleet, see?" The display turned sideways, an image of the signal diffusing once near the enemy ships blinked, clearly showing what was happening. Odessa made a disgruntled sound and walked back over to the main display. It had the shielding data on it, monitoring the enemy attack. A few areas of the shielding were changing to a softer shade of blue. She pointed to one such area. "Their strategy has merit. By focusing on a few target areas, it looks like they can weaken the barrier in places." Franklin shifted his focus, rolling back over to his original workstation. "Yes, if they can sustain their attacks, small areas of the shielding will start to open. It will take days, though. If they lose patience and fire anything larger, the shielding will rebalance. We're trapped in here. Hiding was a bad idea. We should have attacked as soon as we saw their fleet approaching." Kara spoke from across the room. Over the days and weeks, she had developed into a contrarian, often taking the opposite position to any idea or strategy Odessa proposed. Kara continued, "Now we're all going to die here. We put our entire contingent of combat androids outside the shield. We didn't think they would jam us. There are 20,000 Machians stuck in here, and now we're yelling in a soundproof room." It was easy to make these kinds of accusations after the fact. They weren't helpful, but it sounded like you knew what you were doing while others didn't. Odessa called it playing defense. She was well familiar with the personality type. She experienced it while she worked with Logan as a street enforcer before agreeing to take on the mining contract that brought them here in the first place. She had tried different strategies to deal with Kara. She had tried asking her opinion about something early in the analysis, tried sticking to facts that everyone could agree with, tried ignoring her. Nothing seemed to work, but now was no longer the time to placate. Things were deadly serious. "Kara, do you have anything helpful to add about what actions we should take now? If you do, we would all like to hear them. If you don't, this is not the time to second-guess things we, at this point, cannot change." Kara looked indignant. "I'm tired of you making bad decisions, is what I am saying. You are leading us over a cliff. It's time to change leadership." Odessa was not sure which direction to take to respond. She was uninterested in forming councils and having every decision be a deliberation. Yes, that was how their home moon was government operated, and it was the structure most Machians were used to. She decided to be straight. "Kara, we're not going to put every decision out to a council, and unless you are challenging me for clan leadership, I'm going to ask you to rein it in and let us get on with the serious business at hand." Katine spoke up. She was not aligned with Kara, but the two traveled in the same circles. "Odessa, you might not want to dismiss this. There are substantial rumblings among many clan members about the lack of input they have to what we do. I'm not saying that they are expressing disappointment with you personally, but there is a growing sense of confusion and anxiety about not having any larger form of representation like we do back home." The others around the table nodded, suggesting they heard the same things. Odessa pushed anger down, trying not to show it. She never wanted to be the clan prime in the first place. She had turned it down originally, allowing her younger brother Logan to become prime. He was much better at it. He understood what was important and was able to process the details as well as the big picture, and always seemed to know which was more significant at the time. Responding impulsively, she asked, "Do you all really think that now is the time to have this discussion, in the middle of an attack?" It was the wrong thing to say. It opened the door and legitimized the topic. Kara stood up, her moment at hand. "If not now, when? You just told us we have several days trapped inside the shielding. At the same time, the Abraxian swarm pounds away at it, intent on killing us, or worse, sucking the spirit from us and leaving our bodies alive. You got us into this mess by not putting a proper set of councils in place, by not seeking input and working together to choose the best course of action. If we had councils in place, and this is what we all decided, everyone would be brought in. As it sits now, there is no one to blame but you." Kara started to walk around. The speech seemed rehearsed, even though she seemed to be showing genuine fear of the situation also. It's one thing to run a ship this way when on a contract. No one would argue with you on that. But we are no longer a ship, we are a city now, a society of 20,000 people. She looked both pleading and accusatory at the same time. Anger flared in Odessa again. Kara knew that a quarter of the people were victims of the Oldtech machine. She wasn't sure if she should argue that point or one of the other points. Her thought process up until now had been on dealing with the Abraxian threat. It was real and deadly. A debate over people's feelings felt purposeless and exhausting at this point. She allowed her anger to win. "Kara, you forget your place. This society, as you call it, exists because Logan and I acted. We saved every one of you. No one would be here to have their feelings hurt if it weren't for us stepping up and doing what needed to be done. We're still in that same set of actions, the same events. It's not over. To get us back to where our focus needs to be, I can't agree to this with you. Once the Abraxian threat is over, we are secure here on Alethea. We can have this discussion about bringing in the council governing model." End of discussion. It wasn't a question, but Kara used it as an opening anyway. "That's not good enough. Many of us fear you will lead us to our deaths, never making it to the situation you describe, always postponing so you can stay in charge. There will always be another crisis, never the right time to let the people's voices be heard." Kara had walked away from Odessa, now having her back to her, which was a sign of disrespect in a Mashi council meeting. Odessa was now furious. "Kara, I have had enough. I am removing you from your leadership position as a guardian. You are dismissed so we can finish our planning. Please leave." Everyone in the room showed surprise. Katine spoke immediately out of reflex more than anything else. "Odessa, I don't think that's the right thing to do. You make yourself look more and more like a dictator. This will feed the fears the people already have." Odessa snapped back. "Katine, are you challenging my leadership here also?" "No," Katine put her hand up to show she was not. "But my words are true. You need to think this through." Odessa turned her back to Kara, returning the rude gesture. "Leave, Kara. You are done here." Chapter 3. Glyph. Kara stormed out of the CIC room and walked deeper into the underground hangar. And left, she was pouting and felt a mixture of emotions, fear, anger, and something else. Frustration maybe, or pent-up rage, some internal emotion driving her forward and making her feel awful. She stopped and turned around, instead deciding to head to the front of the hangar so she could see outside. It took a few moments to get there. The underground area was large. As she emerged, the opening was well away from the city they had built, but still under the blue shielding system that Franklin had put in place. She could see the massive swarm fleet and the thousands of tiny black figures, the swarm soldiers in their combat armor, moving in cycles, attacking points on the shielding. She was genuinely terrified. She remembered having been so scared when held in captivity in the Oldtech facilities. She was constantly afraid that the enormous Batorian guards would pick her to be placed in the machine. Her very life essence was at risk. The pain of the process looked so awful, and what they did to the bodies afterward. She shuddered at the memory, at the sense of hopelessness and exposure. Then she heard the low, loud hum of the swarm ships again. The noise grew more audible when they moved. The strain of the frequency drives, the sound waves, were what moved the vessel. She watched, feeling that same familiar cold feeling. Fear. They were going to get in, and they were going to torture and kill everyone, or worse. Several of the Abraxian ships, 9 in total, started showing more yellow and green lights than others. They slowly began to advance, and Kara couldn't figure out what they were doing. They slowly maneuvered, forming an oddly shaped circle with several of the ships inside the ring. There was something familiar about the formation. It was odd, but she had a good view of it. Then it struck her. She recognized it. Kara ran as fast as she could, back into the hangar and back to the CIC room. She burst through the door in a cold panic. It startled everyone. Odessa's face grew firm, and she started to say something, but Kara started yelling before she could. "It's from the old city." The statement surprised everyone, including Odessa. Kara continued, "It's from the old city, the swarm ships." Katine spoke before Odessa could, wanting to avoid a confrontation and understand what Kara thought was so important. "What is from the old city, Kara? What are you talking about? The ships." Kara was motioning to the display in the room that showed the swarm fleet outside the shielding. But the angle wasn't right. They wouldn't be able to see the pattern. She ran over to the controls, flipping through the viewport until she found one where you could see the 9 ships that had moved over the base from a better angle. Odessa studied the new image on display. "That is odd. Franklin, what do you make of it?" "No!" Kara yelled. "Look!" She pointed at the ships in the circle and the odd formation. "It's one of the glyphs from the old city we were in. They are making that formation in the air over us." "I see it." Odessa put her hand on Kara's arm to lower it. "It does look like one of the symbols we saw around the city." Kara's anger flared. She batted Odessa's hand away. "Why are they doing this? What are they going to do to us?" She was in complete terror, frantic and losing control of herself, starting to cry. "Why won't they leave us alone? Why didn't we run away? We can't fight them. They want to do horrible things to us. Why?" Odessa looked over to Katine and made a head motion. Katine understood and went to Kara to try and calm her, putting a hand on either shoulder, not an embrace, but in a reassuring manner, and moved her away from the display and away from Odessa. Kara collapsed, and Katine caught her. She was weeping uncontrollably. The hum from the swarm ships grew so loud they could hear in the room, a low, deep noise that made the ground vibrate. The green and yellow lighting flared bright, bouncing now between the ships. Something was happening. Suddenly, multiple messages started flooding in all at once. They were frantic calls of warnings and for help, people yelling on the other end of the comm. They were lucky the internal communication system was hardwired into the base and hangar to the CIC, so it was not jammable by the Abraxian fleet. Odessa answered one of the calls. "They're going crazy." All of a sudden, they got up and there was a short pause on the line with screaming coming in from the background. "What in the world? No, she just bit Emily in the neck. Ancestors. What is going on?" Odessa yelled into the comm. All the feeds were going about like this. "No, get back. What are you doing?" There was a gurgling sound on the other end of the feed. Odessa grabbed her helmet and put it on, signaling to Aaron and Jace to do the same thing and to follow her. Katine had already left with Kara. Odessa closed the CIC door, leaving Franklin inside. She ran across the underground hangar, past the hundreds of scout ships they had recovered and restored. These were large ships, 2 levels, light on armaments, but with enough living capacity for 1,000 people. With the swarm fleet jamming communications, she needed to get to X4 and the contingent of E2 ethereals on the other side of the hangar. Kara was correct that all of the combat androids were outside the shielding. Still, Odessa was not as incompetent as Kara was pretending. There were still hundreds of E2 units inside the base. While not heavy fighting machines like the combat androids, ethereals were versatile and a whole lot more advanced technology. They were competent combatants. Odessa wanted to tell Aaron and Jace to activate their hand-to-hand arm bracings. Still, even though they were just a few measures away, the peer-to-peer channel would not open from inside the helmet. She pulled her helmet off and dropped it as they ran, yelling to them, "Activate your arm weapons. Get your helmets off. We have to be able to communicate." They did as they were told. removing their helmets as she had and activating the arm units. On each, a razor-thin blade sprang out. Sleek round curves formed outside their hands and forearms, tracing to the elbows where they extended past to a point. The edges glowed white, extremely hot to immediately cauterize wounds after cutting or penetrating an enemy. The blades did not radiate heat, but they were blisteringly hot to the touch. X4 had hundreds of E2 ethereals in formation on the far side of the hangar, and they were on full alert and ready to counterattack any swarm breach of the shielding. Odessa was yelling at him when she thought she was within audible range. X4, get 2 companies over to the CIC and guard the door. Keep it secure, no matter what. Don't let anyone in other than myself or another Guardian. The comms are down, so give them the orders and use Command Authorization Zeta 6. Odessa's command code as Clan Prime, and do it now. X4 moved over to the 2 closest formations and gave the order. The ethereal sprinted off back in the direction of the CIC room. He then turned to Odessa. "Ma'am, what is going on? We can hear disturbances down the causeway and into the living areas. Did the swarm somehow get through the shielding?" Odessa looked at X4 as if surprised by the question. "No, I don't think so. From what I could gather, the people we have been nursing who were victims of the Oldtech machine, the ones whose spirits have been taken, they are doing something. It isn't clear to me what. It seems to do with the swarm warships." Several of the ships changed position into a formation matching a glyph from the old city. They started glowing green and yellow more than the other ships. It seems to have somehow done something to the spiritless people. X4 looked straight at her and tilted his head. "Ma'am, I do not understand." Odessa nodded. "I don't understand either, but we have to deal with this anyway. Aaron, Jace, and I are going to head in and see if we can figure out what is really going on and help." "I would like to go with you," X4 said with no outward emotion. Odessa nodded. "I think that is a terrific idea. Put the rest of the E2s on guard and defend orders, and get them to the front of the hangar, but still keep them inside, not visible from the air. The comms are down, so position some runners at the causeway entrances to send new orders if we need to. Then take what? Take 10 of the E2s with you and follow me. Meet me over there at the entrance when you are ready. Hurry, we don't have long." She turned to Aaron and Jace, saying, "You 2 come with me," then walked over to the opening to the causeway between the hangar facility and the underground living areas. As they walked over, Araini, the older of the 2 brothers, said, "Let's say these soulless people are doing harm to others. That's pretty much the feeling I am getting. What are we going to do about it? There are 5,000 of them in there. There are only going to be 15 of us, counting the ethereals." X4 came running over before they reached the entryway. Everything was ready. "I suggest we hurry. The sounds I am picking up on my inloads are in no way good." Odessa nodded and started to run along with X4. The 2 brothers fell in and ran alongside her. As they ran, she answered Aaron's question. "At this point, we are going to play it by ear. But I have the same sense you do. You need to prepare yourself. If they are attacking regular people, biting them like I think I heard, we are going to have to subdue them somehow." Aaron nodded. Jace had a look of resolve on his face, as did Odessa. The construction along the causeway was megalithic. They had imitated their home moon Machi in the construction design, moving giant rocks, squaring them off, and stacking them into impressive and artistic designs. The underground area sat directly beneath the above-ground area, and the 2 mimicked each other in design. There was about an even split between people who wanted to live on the surface and those who preferred the underground residences in day-to-day life. Before the attack, they had moved everyone underground as a safety precaution. "We're dealing with several problems," Odessa said as they ran, talking to the 2 brothers and X4. The 10 ethereals trailed the lead group. "We can debate later the merits of moving the soulless ones in with their families and friends for caring instead of keeping them together like we had done originally. I should not have given in to this. You know I was against it. Unlike what happened earlier with Kara, in hindsight, bad decisions may have been made all the way around." She turned to look specifically at the 2 brothers. "Do you 2 feel comfortable with the hand-to-hand configuration here?" I think you are ready based on our training sessions, and these are not enemy troops." Aaron answered as he often did, speaking for the two men. "Yes, we both are confident. I'm just concerned with being able to balance using the weapons in a non-lethal fashion. All we have ever trained on were lethal tactics." The causeway ended, and the ceiling opened to a great area. The light was shining from large areas open to the above-ground structures. Artificial lights were shown here and there, creating a majestic feeling. The path sloped down, providing a view of the entire arrangement. Short buildings of 2 and 3 stories, open areas for meetings and families, and more highly organized sections with storage and workplaces lay before them. Everything was organized into a grid pattern, roughly 20 by 20 wide and deep. Instantly, their perception of what they were dealing with changed, going from bad to worse. The underground city was a bloody mess. There were bleeding bodies everywhere. Many were dead, many just wounded. Thousands of people ran to and fro. There was movement everywhere. People chasing people. After the shortest study of the situation, you could identify the soulless people from the regular people. They had a different look about them. They also moved in packs of 7 or 8, chasing after others. They were swift. In the ample open space in the city center that normally was a park, a place of safety and relaxation, thousands of people had formed a defensive perimeter. Weaker or injured people on the inside could defend themselves and form a circle facing out, fending off the soulless with chairs and sticks or anything they could use as a weapon to keep the soulless at bay. The packs of soulless ran from side to side, searching for a weakness in the defensive circle, in the same way the swarm outside was moving around and searching for weakness in the defensive shielding. They were definitely not the brainless entities that they had been for the past several months. There was coordination and purpose now. Chapter 4. Directives. Logan and E7 spent the next several hours working their way to the different hiding locations to give orders to the thousands of staged combat androids. They had them hidden in caves and other underground areas, behind enough rock that they believed the swarm scans would not pick them up. The plan had been, and still was, to launch a counteroffensive once the swarm had spent days expending resources against the base shielding. Logan had used the attack from below strategy before. Now, the only difference was that he would have to monitor the swarm's progress against the shield instead of coordinating with Odessa from inside the base. It made Logan feel anxious, but he knew what had to be done. It was his plan, after all. On their way to the first group, the first of several that they would need to visit, Logan was working to develop the proper codegrams to give each combat android so they could operate in tandem. They were moving quickly on the ground, across desert landscape, on the other side of a mountain ridge from the base and current swarm attack. The difficulty with the codegrams was accounting for independent operation, but still in a coordinated fashion since all network and data exchange interfaces were currently jammed. "I have been cross-loading the codegrams. I would like your input to the logic," Logan said. "Of course," E7 said, having an easier time moving over the rocky landscape than Logan. While Logan was a combat android with many modern refits, the bare chassis was designed for frontal assault and defensive strength. It was nimble enough in a close-quarter fight. Still, it relied more on brute force and firepower than the elegance needed to traverse the side slope of a mountain. E7, as one of the most advanced ethereals, was designed more in the form of a person, appearing fit and trim. She was much more acrobatic and could quickly move around the rocks and across the landscape. While not delivering the raw power of a combat android, she was much nimbler. She could fight gracefully alongside the most athletic of people. Logan continued, "I know you are aware of the logic cross-load codegrams that the combat androids use for decisions. I am working on the orders within this framework of the 3 logical directives. Help me come up with an order I can give, please. How to modify the directives. The android must follow the orders it has received from its verified prime. That's me, of course. Second, the android must preserve friendly resources, including itself, to the maximum extent possible while still adhering to the first directive. Third, if unable to contribute to Directive 1, and while not in conflict with Directive 2, acquire external resources until a contribution is possible. My concern, E7, is that I do not want the combat androids to act on Directive 3 until the battle has begun. I am comfortable programming a hold for action order's codegrams, and I am comfortable programming the action order and delivering it when it is time. I am struggling to combine the two without a paradox loop, or worse, the androids not reacting when the time is right, even without a peer-to-peer inload. Logan looked over to E7. She was running next to him, gracefully leaping over or moving around obstacles. "Sir," she said, "you have the advanced Series 8 processors, a large array of them. My processors are exceptional, but those are more advanced. Can you not hand the Paradox over to them for processing? I am happy to help, but it seems those would be better resources." Logan had already done exactly as she suggested. "I have the processor, but we kept my core CPU infrastructure in place. I didn't bring over the Series 8 coroutines, just their hardware and the operating system to run it. I can certainly process deep inloads very quickly, and I don't see a top end to the number of recursions I can crossload, but I am relying on my consciousness as the coroutine, and I don't have deep programming expertise." E7 took just a moment, storing some data she thought might be necessary for later. Then, "Yes, sir, I understand. The paradox is conditional, so we will need to implement a clear, qualified statement to know what event triggers a return to their core directives." "Yes, okay, sir. I see the paradox. We can't override the core directives. If they could be overridden, an enemy could take advantage of that possibility to inload different orders." They both ran together for a few moments in silence. It was a short time in the physical world, but an exceedingly long time for an ethereal to use its processors to cross-load and study a concept. "I have it, sir," E7 said. "It's simple. We need to front-load their orders with a simple conditional. They don't have to iterate through optional process actions until the dependent has been met. I think we can give a simple order. Hold here until you see your prime attack the enemy ships, or you receive a new order from your prime. If you see your prime attack the enemy ships, seek and destroy targets of opportunity." Logan thought about the orders for a moment. "Excellent, E7, thank you. It is simple, but I would not have thought of it. I was trying to figure out how to tweak the lower directives instead of simply giving an order supported by the first directive." They ran on in silence, reaching the first group of combat androids and delivering the new orders as codegrams. Logan had to physically tap the front interface to each machine to deliver the codegrams. It would take the better part of the rest of the day to physically get to each of the remaining units. Odessa and her contingent of Guardians and Ethereals worked their way to the open area where the defensive circle had been established. The Soulless ran at the 3 live Guardians when they saw them. Still, interestingly, they did not move aggressively against any of the Ethereals, even though with the combat armor on, it was difficult to visually differentiate between a person in combat armor and an Ethereal in combat armor. As Odessa and her team ran into the large grid, they did everything they could not to fatally injure a Soulless. However, other than a blow to immobilize them by damaging one or both of their legs, it was impossible to get them to calm down or stop attacking for any amount of time. They ended up killing most of the Soulless they encountered, the leg wounds often proving just as fatal as an intentionally decisive blow. When they entered the large open space, Odessa gave new orders. She had to yell them loud so they could be heard over the noise the Soulless made and the screaming and yelling that was going on in the large crowd in the middle of the space. "Everyone, break out of formation and take out targets of opportunity. We don't have a choice, so I am authorizing deadly force. Don't worry about trying non-lethal attacks. We've lost thousands of people. We need to end this now." With that, she ran ahead, motioning to Aaron to go to her left and Jace to her right. This would be their first individual combat test, but she had confidence in both of them. They did well in their training and knew how to use the armor effectively. She then looked at X4 and made a quick circular motion with her hand. X4 understood that meant to deploy the E2 units on the edges of the area all the way around the defensive formation, which he did. Odessa ran forward, A pack of 8 soulless, seeing her and running towards her. She brought her arms up into a fighting position and ran straight for the group. They charged each other. The soulless had their arms out forward and were making biting motions with their mouths. There was intelligence to their movements, but not to their attacks, as they were simply trying to grab and bite. When they closed in, Odessa quickly moved to her left and began her ballet of death, dancing nimbly from one soulless to another. Slicing down at one moment and up at another, she made quick work of them. Blood spattered out everywhere. The soulless bodies were still fully alive, and a wound to them bled profusely, even from the white-hot arm bracings. 2 more groups of soulless charged her. She was starting to become overwhelmed just by the sheer number of bodies around her. There was no HUD display without her helmet on, so the armor was not monitoring her vitals. It did not inject the combat stims when she started to fatigue. She was surprised at how much she had become reliant on the underlying technology. She was not in combat armor when she worked in law enforcement, but she was a better fighter now. A 4th group of soulless stormed in, rushing her as she worked to defend herself from the growing crowd around her. She felt her leg buckle. One of the soulless had fallen and rolled up on it. True panic swept her emotions as she fell backward. She was vulnerable with her helmet off, and the primal fear of having her face bitten off overwhelmed her. The crowd around her was too dense. She was having difficulty moving her arms to build up any momentum to keep attacking. As she went to the ground, all she could do was bring her arms up over her face and head for protection. The soulless were beating and grabbing her, falling on her as she lay on the ground. Their mouths were biting air over and over, trying to reach her face. Suddenly, the weight on her began to lessen, and within a few moments, Aaron was there, using the point at the elbow of the arm bracings to stab and pull the soulless off her. Once enough were off, he extended a hand and got her to her feet. "They are charging you almost exclusively," Irene yelled, swinging around so that he and Odessa could stand back to back. He had not killed the soulless he pulled off, but he had injured them. They were now reforming and charging in again. But having 2 people in armor back to back proved enough of a strategy. They could prevent the other from being overwhelmed. The final soulless charged and went down, a clean decapitation by Odessa. She looked around and saw that the thousands of people in the center of the area were now just watching her. X4 and the E2 units were spaced out. She and Aaron stood in the center of a bloody pile of bodies. Now that it was over, there was an eerie silence in the area. Odessa stood heaving air. She leaned and put her hands on her knees. Aaron did the same thing, winded also. Jace walked over to the 2, a look of agony on his face. "That was awful. What the heck happened?" He put his arm on his brother's shoulder and his head down. Everything stayed that way for a few moments. No one was sure what would happen next, trying to take in the scene of bloody carnage and understand it at any level. From nowhere, more of the odd sound that the soulless made could be heard, getting close. Odessa looked in the direction of the sound, and there was another 1,000 or so soulless rushing in from all directions, coming from other areas of the underground base. Someone in the crowd yelled, "Here they come again." The crowd started to disperse. Odessa screamed, "No! Everyone stay in your group. This will be the last of them." Most people stayed put. A few ran. It was clear the soulless charge was directed against Odessa. This would be too many to deal with all at once. The sheer force of 1,000 people rushing her would be enough to overwhelm her and the small group of guardians. From nowhere, X4 and his squad of E2 units came rushing in, running past Odessa and smashing into the front of the soulless in a countercharge. X4 had his team in a wedge formation with himself at the front point. The ethereals were solid and heavy, about 4 times a person's weight given the same size. X4 and the E2s stood firm, leaning into the onslaught, cutting with their hand weapons as best as they could. Their goal was to create separation and diminish the power of hundreds of soulless rushing forward, which they did. They slowly moved backward towards Odessa, keeping their facing ahead against the enemy advance. The mob split in 2. Those not killed by an ethereal strike flowed around the wedge to the left or right. Odessa and the two other guardians went to work to deal with the dispersed soulless near the rear of the wedge formation. They had enough room to swing and maneuver. The fight went on for several minutes, a long time for anyone to exert themselves to this degree. Jace began to tire first, then Aaron. Odessa was fatigued, but was doing a better job working through it, her field experience showing. There were still too many soulless. The ethereals were doing the lion's share of the work in killing them. Jace finally buckled, out of energy. He was moving slower, and soulless were able to grab onto him. Odessa still seemed the primary target for them, but there was a moment where they sensed Jace's weakness, and dozens more moved his way. "Help!" Jace yelled when he realized he was being overwhelmed. Odessa had already noticed what was happening, and she was working her way over to him. Aaron heard the call, and his head snapped around. He was struggling, but a flash of panic crossed his face when he saw what was happening to Jace. "No!" he yelled. "X4, help Jace now!" Aaron turned to try and get over to Jace, but there were too many soulless grabbing with their hands and trying to bite him for him to be able to move very far. He was nearly becoming overwhelmed himself. X4 did not change his actions. He remained at the tip of the wedge, several measures away, swinging to down soulless as they continued to charge. "I cannot leave my position here, or we will all be overrun," he said calmly but loudly. Aaron heard him. He redoubled his efforts to get to Jace, but he could not move and remain in control of protecting himself if he did try to move too quickly. Odessa was having more luck, but she was not going to reach Jace in time either. There were twice as many soulless surrounding her. Suddenly, Jace let out a blood-curdling scream. It started loud, then ended as a gurgling sound. The soulless had encircled him, and there were too many pushing in from every direction. Several had hold of him, some holding down his arms so he could no longer defend himself, others at his legs so he could not move. They started to bite his exposed face, ripping pieces off with their teeth. He continued to scream until one of them bit him in the mouth, pulling out his tongue. It was just horribly gruesome. The soulless around him moved quickly and piled on, enjoying the kill. After a few more moments, they had his combat armor off. He was being bitten all over, blood everywhere. The final soulless in the charge were through the wedge. X4 and the E2s turned around and started advancing. X4 gave an audible command. The E2s broke ranks and started attacking soulless targets of opportunity. X4 ran over to Aaron, who was nearly overwhelmed himself, and started to pull soulless off him. The worst of it was over. After a few more moments, the remaining mob was downed. Chapter 5: Bad Choices. Kara had pulled herself back together. Kitine brought her to Franklin's workshop, then went to the causeway to her medical offices. The workshop was near the rear of the hangar, opposite both the CIC room and the causeway to the living areas. She sat at her workstation for a few moments, her panic lessening, the sting of Odessa removing her from her position taking its place. She turned on her monitor and tapped a few keys. The display from outside showed in half the screen, a feed from inside the underground base on the other. Outside, the swarm hung in the air, their frantic attack movements paused. The 9 ships in the glyph formation continued to glow bright green and yellow, with arcs of lighting dancing between the ships. The display of the underground base showed frantic activity. Kara could see Odessa and her small team running to the central open space, where it looked like many of the survivors had formed a makeshift defensive group. She watched as Odessa and the ethereals cleared the area. The second wave of soulless rushed in, nearly overwhelming the defenders. She watched Jace be overwhelmed and then eaten. It was the most horrific thing she had ever seen. As the soulless started to pull him out of his armor, she turned the display off, then vomited into a nearby trash can. As she lifted her head back up, she saw X7 in the corner of the workshop, deactivated, and strapped into a sizable diagnostic board that Franklin had built to try and discern what was wrong with him. X7 had seemed so confident and knowledgeable after his transition. The others had been confused by his change, scared of it even, but Kara had been intrigued. She looked back around at her monitor and reactivated the underground feed. The outside swarm was back to their original pattern, several thousand flying around the blue shielding, attacking in a coordinated effort in several places. The bright green and yellow arcs were gone, and the 9 ships were moving back to their positions in the different straight-line formations. Odessa and her team seemed to have dealt with the soulless charges. They were now talking to the survivors in the middle of the open space. Aaron was on the ground holding what was left of Jace's body, weeping. She flipped another switch, and a third view was added. Franklin in the CIC, the door closed, and several squads of E2s standing outside the room, half guarding it against any attack attempt. This meant she was alone. She got up and closed the door to the workshop. She didn't think there was a chance she would be disturbed anytime soon. A lot was going on. She turned from the door and walked over to X7, standing close and looking at his lifeless form. Her eyes were puffy red, but she could see clearly out of them. Looking to her left, she saw the activation circuit and programming orb. If she could have a powerful ally like X7, she could decide who was a guardian and who wasn't, not Odessa. Kara felt she knew how things should work, how to run a society and make good decisions. If the swarm broke through the shielding, X7 could protect her. If they somehow survived, she could use him as her enforcer. All she had to do was use the same programming change Logan made with his combat android chassis. He had changed his core coroutines to only accept him as Prime, to only listen to his voice for instructions so he could never be overridden. She could do the same thing with X7. Make his core coroutines only accept her as Prime. X7 was strong and intelligent. She could make him loyal. Kara walked back over and looked at the display again. Nothing much had changed in the 3 views. The swarm was still attacking the shielding. Odessa was working with the survivors of the soulless attack, and Franklin was still in the CIC monitoring the shielding, guarded by hundreds of ethereals outside the door in the hangar. Walking back over to the activation circuit, she reached down and flipped the switch. Immediately, X7 opened his eyes and turned his head from side to side. After just a moment, he focused on her. "I remember you. Your name is Kara," he said. Magnus snapped awake. He was still in the nerd's workshop. "I'm not going to let them deactivate me again," he thought to himself instantly. The pretty little one, the helper, was looking at him. She had been crying, her eyes puffy and her face red. She was only partially dressed. He saw a discarded set of combat armor her size in the corner of the room. She was wearing loose-fitting shorts and a white shirt that left little to the imagination. "I remember you. Your name is Kara," he said. Something wasn't right. There was a monitor behind her with 3 video feeds on it. One looked like outside. He could see swarm troops and several Abraxian frigates and gunships hovering over a blue shield. He assumed the shield was for wherever they currently were. It smelled like underground. Another feed showed what looked like a battle scene aftermath. There were thousands of bodies on the ground and several thousand people milling about, talking. Finally, he saw the nerd, Franklin, in what looked like a command control room on the 3rd feed, guarded against the outside by advanced-looking ethereals. The girl made a face. She seemed prideful that he remembered her name. "She is a follower," he thought. "She'll need ego boosting, but I can manipulate her." "Yes," she said, looking up at him with her big red doe eyes. "What is your name?" she asked him, looking at him hopefully. They had kept calling him X7 in the working sessions. How much time has elapsed since the last time they activated me? He knew this personality type. They wanted praise, and they wanted to know things. They coveted secrets, using them as weapons when they could. Magnus had learned a lot about how the ethereal named X7 he was trapped in worked. He knew how to tell it to use its scanners and connect to the communication network where massive amounts of data were available. He tried reaching out to the network now, but was blocked by something. A dark force. The Abraxians. They were blocking the network. "Are we under attack?" he asked Kara. A surprised look crossed her face. She was flushed. He had caught her by surprise with the question. Magnus took it to mean that either she was not supposed to have activated him, or if she was supposed to, she was not supposed to let him know what was going on outside. Either way, it was more information for him. "How could you know that?" she asked, turning even redder in the cheeks. Magnus tried to nod his head, but it didn't move, so he said, "You have the monitor behind you up with 3 video feeds." She snapped around, then looked back, relieved. Yes, we are in a bad way. I told them all that we should have sent a force to fight far away from here and that we should have hidden before they got here. It's the swarm troops. I was hoping you knew something about them or that you would have ideas for what to do now. Magnius knew the swarm and the Abraxians proper very well. He fought them and beat them during the Abraxian Wars, the only Machi commander to do so. But curiosity had him. What about the middle feed? I see thousands of dead in an underground area. It looks like an underground city. There are mangled bodies and blood is everywhere. I don't see any swarm forces though, just civilians and a few combat troops. She looked back at the monitor again, like she had to confirm each time that she really saw it. I am not entirely sure what happened, but I believe somehow the swarm used mind control to manipulate the soulless we were caring for. The Oldtech machines separated their bodies from their spirits. All of a sudden, after months of being docile, they started attacking anyone they could. The soldiers you see are our guardians dealing with the situation. That term struck Magnius as odd. Guardians? You mean the soldiers on the display? Kara wrinkled her nose at him. X7, you're a guardian. Do you not remember? Magnius honestly did not know what a guardian was. The current rigid class hierarchy Machi used had been put in place long after his time. I do not, he said. Are you familiar with the Machi councils? She asked. How the government is set up? Not sure how important this was right now. Give me the two-sentence overview, Magnius said authoritatively. He instantly wished he had not used that tone. He did not want the girl to become threatened by him. Not yet, anyway. I want to understand, but we might have more pressing matters than a history lesson, he continued, changing his vocals to be more accommodating and less commanding. He couldn't tell if she noticed, but she relaxed, almost seeming relieved. What is driving her? Magnius thought. He didn't care. All he really cared about was getting her to reactivate him. Once fully reactivated, he could put codegrams in place to counter the diagnostic tools they were using on him, so they could not deactivate him again. The councils decided that it was too difficult to work with the citizens directly. They increased the ranks of the truth-tellers and made them the only go-between, put them actively into the process instead of passively by its side to record everything. They then declared the council position as the highest echelon of society, naming guardians as the next highest, and everyone else as a digger. They redefined our purpose to be the production of mineral excavation. This was all before my time, but it makes sense to me. We focus on being good at producing something. Magnius found the explanation odd. There had been councils and truth-tellers in his time, but not to the extent described by her. What about the military? He asked. Kara had a funny look on her face. Why would we need a military? We are all at peace, given the Great Resolution. We have law enforcement, which is where Odessa and Logan come from. I guess they are the closest we have now to a military. Magnus tried to move his head again to signal at the monitor. Frustration flared, then subsided. He had to manage himself here. Looking at the monitor, I think you need a military. She turned around, then back. This is all a mess. I don't understand how the Batorians and Fovians are working outside the resolution, and I never heard about Swarm or Abraxians until after we destroyed the facilities here. We need help. Maybe you are right, and we need a military. A real military, not Odessa pretending she knows what she is doing. Magnius weighed his options, then decided this was his chance. I have some of my memories back. They are from a time when there was a Machi military, from before the resolution you mentioned. I know how to fight. Kara looked at him again. She got close, closer than she needed to. Do you want me to activate you? Magnus watched her. She has flushed red again. What is her game? He thought. It didn't matter. He did want her to activate him. It's up to you. If you think I can help, I am more than happy to. Under your guidance, of course. Magnus said. That had her. Her cheeks practically glowed red. She was going to use him for some purpose of her own. Given how she had spoken about the current leader, Odessa, he thought he now understood what Kara was up to. What will you do? Kara said. She was now a little coy. Yes, he knew her type. She yearned for the advantage and authority. He knew how to talk to her. Here she saw herself as the one in control. He knew what she wanted and how to use it against her. Simple. Magnus replied, "If I can study the situation more, I can put together some suggestions for you. We can discuss them, and you can tell me which ones you want me to act on." It was completely and totally untrue, but Magnus had charisma, even while stuck inside this stupid electronic blender. She lit up with excitement. She had stayed close to him this whole time. She leaned over to the side where the hardware was that he was attached to and did something. Almost instantly, he was able to move. Kara leaned back up. "How's that?" she asked. Magnus reached over and undid the straps that had him attached to the table and unplugged the cabling that ran from him to the hardware she had just deactivated. He walked by her and stood in front of the monitor with the video feeds. Kara walked with him. She was expecting something very different from him, but now her back is straight and radiating pride at being in charge. "Can you put on one of these other displays, the tactical overview?" Kara did not know what that meant. She had a look of panic on her face. Magnus didn't know enough about the situation, so he kept himself humble to keep using her. "Are you running a CIC system?" he asked. Yes. She knew they were because it was what Odessa used to brief them in the Guardian meetings. "Can we access it from here?" she thought. "No, it's in the room there," she replied, pointing to where Franklin was on the viewport. Magnus started to move toward the door. "Wait!" Kara said, not a yell, but a little panicked. "What? We need access to it. You want me to end this siege? I know how," he said. Kara looked a little sheepish, her confident glow gone. "Help me get this stupid armor back on. Just so you know, they aren't going to be happy to see me heading back to the CIC. Magnus helped her with the armor. "I have a feeling we'll change all that pretty quickly," he said. Chapter 6, CIC. Magnus and Kara walked quickly across the hangar, past dozens and dozens of Mashi scout ships. Some of the vessels were newer, some older, all having been salvaged from around the facilities they destroyed a few months ago. Magnus looked carefully at the ships. They all showed signs of repair. They gave him an idea. Kara was in the lead, walking quickly in the awkward combat armor. When she reached the rows of ethereal E2s in front of the CIC entrance, the closest one to her stepped out of ranks to block her way. "I'm sorry, ma'am," it said to her. "We are not to allow any access other than to Guardians." The comment stung Kara more than she realized it would. Her eyes teared up with a combination of frustration and anger. Before she could say anything, Magnus, in the guise of X7, put a hand on the E2 standing in front of her. "It's okay, soldier. She is with me," he said, looking right at the E2 unit, standing close to it. The E2 looked at him and immediately stood back in its formation, allowing both Kara and Magnus to pass. Kara started walking again, but Magnus didn't move. He stood looking at the hundreds of E2 units in their combat configuration. He began to give an order, then caught himself. "I have to seem subservient for a few more minutes so I don't spook the girl," he thought. "Ma'am," he said to Kara, who was a few steps away, "I would like to send one of these units." He realized he wasn't sure what they were called. E2 Ethereals? Yes, E2s. "You are a 7 series. The letter denotes the class and the number the series," Kara said, smiling at the question and walking back his way, cheeks showing just the hint of color. "She really wants to be important," Magnus noted to himself. "Yes, ma'am, E2, he said, sounding like a good little robot. "If you approve, I would like to have 2 units each staged in 18 of the scout ships over there." He indicated the hundreds of ships they had just walked past. "If my analysis proves correct, once we get to the CIC and have a chance to review the tactical data, I believe we can use them to end the Abraxian siege. I'm not going to tell her how I plan on doing it yet. She won't like it," he thought. Kara straightened her back, imitating the body posture she had learned watching Odessa make important decisions. "I think that is a good idea, X7. You have my approval." Magnus rolled his non-existent eyes, but just had X7 say, "Thank you, ma'am." He went to the E2 that had challenged them as they passed and gave a series of orders, putting his hand on the unit so they could exchange data instead of having to issue the instructions verbally. After receiving the order, the E2 unit turned to start to carry them out, first picking out 17 other E2 units. As it stepped away, Magnus reached back out to it, annoyed. Kara watched, not sure what had happened. After just a bit, the E2 unit turned and saluted X7, going about its duty after X7 returned the salute. "What did you tell it?" she asked. Magnus used the ambiguity of the question to answer without revealing anything. "I just adjusted the social codegrams to include military courtesies like saluting and proper order acknowledgement. I'll update the others also. My assumption is that you want to start getting proper respect and civilities per your status." It looked like Kara was going to say something else, but she seemed so pleased with the idea of respect that she let it go. She and Magnus continued to the CIC room. 2 E2 units fell in behind Magnus. Kara looked back at them, then up to Magnus. He returned the look and shrugged his shoulders. A general has a staff, he thought to himself. When they entered the CIC room, Franklin was working behind the largest workstation present. He jumped when the door opened, not expecting anyone to come in. After just a moment, he recovered. "Oh, hi, Kara. I'm glad you are here. I can use some help with the system. I want to run some diagnostics on it to see if we can get around the jamming." "X7, it's good to see you awake again. Did Odessa want you activated to help?" Kara smiled and took a step forward. She spent most of her time working as Franklin's apprentice, so it was a natural emotion to effortlessly glide back into how things had been. After a half step, she stopped herself. "Franklin, I have activated X7 to help us with our defensive strategy. He has several ideas and needs access to the CIC," she said. Franklin nodded, then looked like he had a question. "Wait, did you activate him by yourself, or did Odessa ask you to?" Kara turned red in the face, not the same cheek flush she seemed to exhibit when she was excited to get her way. Her face turned to a look of confusion. She stuttered a few words. Magnus jumped in. "Sir, Odessa activated me under the agreement that I would help analyze the combat situation from here. I agreed to focus on that, putting the other matters on hold until the threat had been resolved. I don't have any idea what other matters there might be, but they would expect me to know them," Magnus thought to himself. Franklin nodded, his face reflecting him going through a couple iterations of thought and being just able to logically link together the explanation X7 gave him. "X7, I know you ran the initial attack and have skill in this area. What do you need?" Magnus walked forward. He felt the thrill of impending battle like he always had. It was a significant relief to him to discover that those parts of him were still present. "I need a codegram interface to the CIC and the ability to cross-load data in real time with it." Franklin frowned, but did as he was asked. He tapped some keys on his workstation, then indicated a terminal near him. Magnus sat down at the terminal and placed his hands on a metal-looking plate near the human input device. Instantly, he was attached to the CIC. He could query history, grab datagrams, and send them off for analytical processing. He could send commands to anything connected to the CIC. The Abraxians were blocking any external signals, but he was directly connected to the hangar, the outside shielding, and fixed internal security components. He instantly sent overrides through the whole system, taking command of it and locking out everyone else. Since he could issue the orders electronically, they went out with blazing speed. Franklin did not know the commands were being sent until his terminal screens each popped up a red message that said he had been logged out. "Oh no," Franklin yelled. "I think the Abraxians have broken into our system." "Relax, technician," Magnus said with no movement. "I am putting safety protocols into the system to prevent exactly that. I will be the only one able to access the CIC from now on." "What?" Franklin was genuinely surprised. He looked at Kara. "Kara, this is no good. Are you behind this?" Kara had recovered from earlier, but this shook her again. "No, I think X7 must be confused." She turned to Magnus and started to walk over to him. One of the E2 units stepped in front of her, blocking her way. Magnus kept processing the CIC data. He was going through everything, including what the CIC system knew about the last 100 years. He discovered how long that had elapsed since his time and the First Abraxian War. Kara was starting to panic and was yelling. Franklin was yelling something also. "I don't have time for these two," Magnus thought. He finished the codegram he was working on and sent it to the communications coroutine. Suddenly, the over-the-air signal freed, and he had access to the peer-to-peer network again. More information came flooding in. The location of the hundreds of E2 ether reels inside the base, and a direct connection to the thousands of combat androids outside the base. He saw several elevated entities in the data and some ethereal unit called X4 with advanced processing capabilities. The large refit combat android named Logan. Another Series 7 ethereal showed up also. The data was different, but familiar in some way. Magnus then recognized E7's thought engrams. He was shocked. What were the odds? Apparently, the 7 series could cross-load with each other and cross-load with the ether through the fabric. While interesting, he stored that information for later, especially noting the identity of the ethereal called E7. What good fortune. First, though, he needed to end this conflict. He found the connections to the E2 units he put in the ships. He tried to access the combat androids directly, but they were cross-linked to Logan only. Apparently, Logan put in some of the same fail-safe controls that Magnus had to prevent anyone else from gaining access to the units. Good, that's innovative thinking by Logan, Magnus thought. He might have some value to me. Let's see how he performs during the conflict. Magnus opened a channel to Logan. Logan, this is X7. I have restored peer communications and am preparing to launch a counterattack. You should have command control back of the combat androids. I have reviewed your attack plan and approve it. It is well thought out. Be ready to counter as soon as I give the order. Acknowledge. Logan's response came in audible speak, an unnecessary burden. He could have just sent the acknowledgement header in a simple message. I am trying to reach Odessa, but her comms still seem to be blocked. Magnus had not activated the communication channel for the biologicals. He did not see a need to. The combat electronic peer arrays are back. The biocom interfaces did not reactivate. We can track that down once the battle is over. Be ready. It won't be but a few more moments. Magnus cut the connection and exchanged data with the E2s on the ship. Something else was going on. It was easy to get lost in the electronic world of the CIC program. Magnus reprioritized his external inloads. The small female was yelling at him and pulling on his arm. She was not strong enough to move it or interfere, but it was annoying. He ordered the 2 E2s in the room to pick up both of the bios and carry them away to a corner of the hangar where he could deal with them later. Chapter 7. Counterattack. The peer-to-peer connection dropped. Logan was getting ready to ask more questions. Instead, he looked over at E7. Do you have a comm channel to Odessa or any of the other Guardians? They were back on their perch on the small hill watching the swarm frigates and gunships and troops above the blue-shielded dome. No, but I have access to X4. You should also, she said. Logan did. He decided not to pursue any other communications. X4 would be harder to deal with. He would be very literal. Instead, he continued waiting for the signal for the counterattack. Whatever was going on inside the base would be best served, just like him and everyone else, in ending the siege first. Nothing happened for a while. Thousands of swarm troops were flying in the air in large formations, rotating in and out so that several points in the shielding were under constant attack. The shielding color in those areas was turning whiter than its original dark blue. The Abraxian frigates and gunships were slowly rotating in the straight-line formations around the base. They had changed formation earlier and returned to this, what appeared to be their base formation a couple hours ago. Suddenly, the shield dropped. It disappeared, opening at the top and fading away quickly. "Oh no!" Logan shouted, stepping forward. "The shield is down." He tried to open a comm to X7, but did not get a reply. Suddenly, scout ships shot out from the hangar, off to the side of the main base structure. They flew out at full speed, distortion fields visible below and behind the ships from the gravity drives at full power. There were 18 ships total, in groups of 2. "What's he doing?" Logan turned to E7, who was watching in silence. "Those scout ships are no match for the gunships." Logan gave the order for his combat android to launch. If this was the counterattack, they were going to be in real trouble, the shielding down and a superior enemy force overhead. The scout ships pressed hard through the wind of the atmosphere, moving fast. Abraxian gunships started letting loose massive missile barrages, dropping the devices into the atmosphere, having them fire off when they were clear of the launching ship. About half the missiles were heading at the ground base, the other half approaching scout ships. As soon as the last scout ship was clear of where the shield had been, it reactivated. Bright solid blue all the way around, just in time to provide a barrier for the missiles. Explosions rocked the sky and the shield dome. Missiles started impacting the scouts as they sped forward. The combat androids cleared the ground cover and launched into the air underneath the gunships and airborne swarm troopers. Then Logan saw it. He changed his orders, telling each formation of androids to pick a swarm trooper formation of opportunity and attack it, changing the full-born assault from the fleet ships to the individual swarm troopers. The scouts started to collide with the Abraxian fleet. There were 2 scouts per gunship or frigate. They were being used as missiles themselves, with devastating effects, as giant, massive, flying ramming machines slamming into the enemy. 1 scout ship would not have been enough. 2 was more than enough. The sheer masses collided, the metal and Oldtech clearsamite bending and twisting on impact. The explosions happened in slow motion. The ships struck each other. Secondary explosions were fired, and the new mass of twisted metal slowly arced to the ground. Where they impacted the ground, further blasts rang out. The air was filled with smoke and falling debris. Dirt and rock kicked up into the air from the immense impacts. E7, get back to the base and see if there is anything you can do to help. I'm going to clear the swarm and end this, Logan said, lifting into the air, extending both arms out where they reconfigured to ranged combat hand cannons, activating and arming. E7 acknowledged the order and sped off in the other direction, heading for the base entrance. Logan organized a flying wing around him, 4 units to one side, 6 to the other. They sped through the air with him in the lead, targeting a central formation that suddenly went active with a fabric connection as a hub when the fleet ships were destroyed. That's their new CIC, Logan cross-loaded. They are trying to coordinate the swarm troops now that the main CIC has been destroyed. At least I know there is not another location nearby, another base, where they could manage things from. That's a good sign. He sped forward. The swarm formed a protective ring around their new central point of coordination. As he approached, Logan began firing his hand cannons into the outer shell of the defensive formation, accelerating to penetrate it and continue to the center. Explosions went off in the sky around him. The swarm was concentrating their fire on his approach. He activated his forward shielding and switched to a melee configuration, his arm bracing extending back out. He spread his arms apart as he flew through the outer group, allowing the razor-thin material to slice through swarm troops in his path. He was a wrecking ball at his center and a blender at the edges, the blades and his forward shielding being deadly weapons. He cleared into the center and targeted a slightly larger swarm trooper, his best analysis at the new swarm leader. Accelerating to maximum, Logan smashed into the armored warrior, destroying the external armor and, in all probability, killing the thing inside. The remaining swarm troops were not easy marks. As their last control point faded away, falling to the ground, their attacks and defensive maneuvers fragmented. This allowed Logan to manage their quick demise and end the conflict. He looked around. The sky was slowly clearing of enemy troopers. What had been thousands strong a few moments ago slowly dissolved. Only his combat androids remained. He had lost just under 200 androids. A quick calculation meant he had beaten the swarm back at nearly 10 to 1. Still, that was almost 10% of his entire contingent. While they had become expert salvagers, losses in this range were not sustainable in the long run. Suddenly, X7 chirped into his comm. "Logan, I monitored your command signals during the battle. You made good decisions. However, your processing was consistently lagging in real-time analysis. I don't have access to your current diagnostics. Were you injured in an attack?" Logan felt a quick wave of annoyance, but he overcame it quickly. It was a valid observation. He would have mentioned it to X7 had he noticed it if their roles were reversed. "I'm still running on the old model combat android cores. Even though I have added several Series 8 processors to my array, it means my central control crossloads execute at standard Android speeds. But to compensate, I can scale in parallel with the new array cores at speeds that exceed even your Series 7 specifications." "Interesting," X7 replied. "So you are more efficient with higher processing volumes, exceeding even my capabilities, but in single combat or smaller engagements, you lag behind. A nagging thought crept into Logan's thought process. It felt like he had just given X7 important information, dangerous for some reason. He also noted it. He could manage an extensive engagement better than X7, but not a small one, or an individual contest. Logan filed that information away and changed the subject. X7, I need comms restored with Odessa. Negative, X7 returned. You should get back here now. I want to talk to you face to face before we turn the BIOS' communications back on. As Logan elegantly drifted off the ground starting the return trip, he gave the combat androids orders to remain outside the shielding and start inventorying and organizing the battle's wreckage. He had developed salvage as a core activity after a battle, given their current situation. However, more on his mind was a feeling of uneasiness with X7. He wanted to ensure that he maintained control of the combat androids just in case. Logan reached out to her on the peer-to-peer network. E7, are you inside the base? I noticed the shields are still activated even though the swarm has been defeated. There was no response. He tried to verify her position, but was met with a blocked signal. With the swarm gone, who is still jamming the network? X4, can you receive my signal? Nothing. X7, can you receive my signal? Immediately, yes, Logan, my orders have not changed. Are you having difficulty processing them? X7 sounded different. Why are comms blocked for all peer connections except yours and mine? Logan asked. They are not blocked, Solider. I simply have not activated them. We can discuss when you arrive. The feed was terminated. Okay, let's get this over with and see what is going on. Logan accelerated to a high velocity, carefully navigating through the ground-level entrance while the outside shielding was still activated. He landed in the hangar near the E2 units stationed outside the CIC entrance. Two of the units moved to block his advance. Logan instinctively sent the stand-down command to the two. Neither acknowledged, and neither moved out of the way. Stand down, Logan said to the two in audible speak. Nothing. He felt anger and pushed the two units out of his way, navigating between them. They weighed a lot and used all their strength to resist his push. Still, he was orders of magnitude stronger, the combat android chassis built for strength, and his recent modifications helping all that much more. Several more E2s started to close in to fill the space. What is going on? Just as the situation was starting to turn into an actual altercation, X7 came out of the CIC and waved an arm, presumably sending a message to the E2 units to stand down. Sorry, Logan. I updated some of their coroutines and failed to add you as a command-level staff. I just flashed the update to all of them. X7, who reactivated you? Logan had a dozen different thoughts and warnings sounding in his mind, but wanted to start with the basics. X7 seemed to be standing taller. Logan, there is a situation I need your help with understanding some of the BIOS. Is Odessa all right? Come into the CIC. Let me bring you up to speed, then we can try and figure that out. Logan walked over, confused. He needed to understand what was going on with X7, but Odessa's safety came before anything. Where is Franklin? Logan asked, walking into the CIC room and seeing that Franklin was not there. I have both technicians stationed on the other side of the hangar. I'll explain everything, but first, I need you to analyze the bio situation. We need to figure out what to do with them. Chapter 8. Frozen Odessa and Aaron could not move. Their armor had been locked now for a while since the end of the soulless charge was over. X4 stood by Odessa, working to unlatch the bindings so she could get out of it. Even the technology that secured the fasteners and clasps was fighting him. It's no good, ma'am. The bindings are holding tight. The suit has power, but it simply will not acknowledge any command, and it is strong enough to resist any force I can bring. We'll need the programming cube that Franklin uses, or one like it, to get you out of it. It was incredibly frustrating. Odessa wanted to scream. X7 came over the comms channel. The threat has been neutralized. I am restoring partial control to the biohabitat. Then the comms went dead, neither sending nor receiving anymore, as they had been. Suddenly, the suit started moving again, responding to her muscle movements. It started working again, so suddenly, both she and Aaron fell over before they realized what had happened. Odessa hit the release before anything else, and the clasps that held the armor in place were released. Orion followed her lead, and they both were out of the armor moments after, sitting on the ground, finally able to look around and take in what had happened. The park in the middle of the underground city looked worse than any battlefield. There were thousands and thousands of dead Machians, mostly the soulless, but hundreds of others too. And since the team had used bladed hand weapons, the amount of blood and gore was excessive. Even though it had been some time, most of the crowd of people were still in place in their defensive circle. Most were sitting down, a few were milling around here and there. Everyone was in shock. X7's voice came over the comm feed. He sounded different when he spoke. "I have reactivated your combat equipment. Please remain in place. The outer doors have been deactivated until I can assess the situation in more detail. I will contact you once my analysis is complete." The connection was terminated before Odessa could respond or ask a question. Odessa turned to X4. "X4, have the E2s transition to medial support. Start assessing the survivors and helping them as best we can. Some will need medical aid. Keep everyone here in the square, just in case." X4 moved off, following her orders. She turned to Aaron. "I'm sorry about your brother." Orion looked from her to the bloody pile of bodies and Jace's corpse. Jace's face had been completely eaten off, exposing the underlying skeleton. There was blood all over his combat armor and on the surrounding ground where he had bled out. "This is the worst thing I have ever seen. I can't even process what happened. I am looking right at it, but I can't understand what I am seeing," Aaron said, clearly still in shock. "I can't believe he is gone. We survived the Oldtech facility together. How could we survive captivity but fail in freedom?" Odessa didn't know if she should answer the question. She didn't know how to help him, so they both just sat there on the ground. Eventually, several people from the crowd walked over. A big woman, who seemed to be a leader of sorts, sat down next to them. Hundreds of people from the group listened for whatever she wanted to talk about. Many people seemed interested in watching Odessa's reaction. "Hello, Odessa. I am Lashera. We have spoken before. Do you remember me?" Her voice was calm and soothing. She had charisma. Odessa looked at Lashera, trying to focus and get herself in the moment, to be a leader and push away her own feelings and trauma. "Yes, of course, I remember you, Lashera," she forced herself to say, trying to sound calm and in control of things. "Good." Lashera was sitting up very straight. "I have been elected to be the head of the New Diggers Union. We have not had the chance to formally notify you because of, well, all this." Odessa nodded, suggesting it was a reasonable reason, which it actually was. Lashera continued, "There are two camps of thinking with the Diggers. Many are happy here and want to stay. They are optimistic, even after all this, at the chance for a new life away from the technology and the ether." Odessa tried to process the message. She couldn't, so she decided to be honest with Lashera. "I don't understand," she said with a tilt of her head. Lashera didn't miss a beat. "They understand that things back home may not be what they thought. They like the work and want to stay." Some things finally clicked for Odessa. "What do you mean they want to stay?" "I haven't provided any other options." She felt an inner irritation at having one more thing to deal with. It was Lashera's turn to tilt her head. A look of calmness came over her. She started speaking slower, like she was trying to explain something complicated to a child. "I am telling you that about half of the Diggers want to stay. Yes, that means the rest of us want to leave." Odessa was genuinely struggling. She realized she had to find a way to get her head straight. This was a meaningful conversation, and she was not prepared to have it right now. Her combat suit was out of stimulant. Her first thought, though, was to use it. She needed a moment and stood up. "Lashera, let's go over there away from everyone else and talk." Just buying herself some time. Lashera stood up also, and they walked together over to a large stone obelisk. Several had been installed here and there, a reminder of their home moon architecture. Odessa composed herself, the walk helping. She was ready. "Okay, Lashera, go ahead." Lashera smiled and spoke in her calming voice, using a slow tempo to her speech. "Odessa, you know there are 15,000 of us? That's so many, and you and Logan have done such an excellent job in figuring everything out, in providing for this vast population, in structuring everything. But we're not in your military. We don't take orders. We are a free people and need the chance to make our own decisions. As of now, so far, you have been making them all for us, telling us to move here, live here, work here, build this, farm that. Odessa allowed herself to process her irritation, looking around at the bloodbath and carnage. Look around us, Lashera. We just had to murder 5,000 of our own people. You say you are not in the military, but we are at war. War with the Abraxians who want this planet back. War with our own government, which has sold us out, tricked us into bondage, and worse. War with the truth-tellers who lie to cover for our leaders. War with other races, Batorians and Fovians, who are in on the deception and work with our enemies. In a war, we need soldiers. We don't ask you to fight, but we do ask you to serve. Is it so hard to honor your debt to us, to do right by your people? Odessa was distraught. To her, this felt like a betrayal. It felt like Lashera only cared about herself. That was the word. This felt selfish. Selfish, wanting to take more when so many others had sacrificed everything. Lashera had an allure about her, and she used it, reaching out and putting her hand on Odessa's shoulder. I don't dispute anything you just said. All I can do is tell you how people feel. How people feel? How they feel. They are feeling anything at all because of all the work and sacrifice that has been made. Logan and I didn't have to do any of this. We could have just left. We had the recourses and could easily have marshaled enough to live out our days rich in any of the border zones we chose. Lashera took her hand off Odessa and looked down, thinking. Looking back up, she said, Odessa, would you rather have 8,000 people stuck here, resenting your leadership, whispering discontent in the shadows? Or would you rather do the right thing, help us return home, and be left with a loyal following free from malcontents? 8,000 people? And that last part is a threat, Odessa pondered, being surprised by the number and the brazen nature of the threat. She spoke honestly, as she was caught off guard. 8,000 diggers? We can't afford to lose that many. We won't have enough workers to run the mining equipment, not to mention the farms we have set up. Lashera was quick to respond, a master manipulator. Can you afford to keep them? They won't work as hard. They will consume more food and resources than they should. There was a pause as a new thought came to her. Are you suggesting you would not let them leave and then force them to work? That's martial law. It would be slavery. Odessa had not thought it through. She didn't think in these terms. I never wanted to be in charge. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted Logan and I to have the chance to restore our clan's standing. Odessa shook her head. I understand, Lashera. Let me talk to Logan, but I will arrange what you ask. This pushed her from anxiety towards depression. I have worked so hard and done so many things that I despise. All for what? Half the people we saved think I'm a wannabe tyrant. She walked back over and sat down near Aaron. He had broken down also, sitting on the ground slumped over, quietly sobbing. Lashera walked back and was giving a speech. Odessa was too far away to hear what she was saying, but she knew what it would be. Chapter 9, X7 is General Magnus Logan stood looking at the primary monitor. X7 stood next to him. The view showed a carnage-ridden area in the underground section of the city. Thousands upon thousands of people were dead, mostly the soulless. Several thousand more were still in the large open space. Some were milling about. Around half were gathered in front of a speaker, including a woman that Logan did not recognize. Odessa and Aaron were sitting by themselves, away from the crowds. Both were weeping with their heads down. That's your leader there, on the ground crying. Someone else is giving a speech, rallying the people, X7 said, allowing amazement and disappointment to come through in his vocal patterns. Magnus thought to himself, this combat android has been imitating the BIOS, especially when it comes to using speech. It's inefficient, but the combat unit has shown good strategic analysis, so I'll emulate that behavior for now. Logan turned his head to look at X7. That's my sister, X7. You should know that, but you don't seem like the same ethereal to me now. You seem different altogether. You know things you couldn't and don't remember things you should. You are correct. My memory circuits keep referring to you as B99, but I don't know why. I know you use the term Logan for self-reference. You also have a good command of strategy and tactics. You show little experience in combat, but seem otherwise competent and apt at learning to me. Logan was not sure about X7's intentions. He had tricked Logan several times before. X7, he started but was interrupted. General Magnius, X7 said. Logan's head twitched. He knew that name. Odessa had been studying him in the archives. She had spent a significant amount of time on General Magnius as a historical figure. X7, have you run diagnostics recently? You sound delusional. Somehow, though, deep down, Logan believed it could be true. It just made sense on some level, even though he didn't know why or how. Ask your sister where she got myself and E7 from. She will verify, at least, that we are not common stock Series 7 ethereals. I can send you the datagrams with my last memories concerning how I died. How my original body died anyway, 100 dominant cycles ago. Logan extended his arm, indicating he wanted X7 Magnus to send him the datagrams. Magnus reached out and put his hand on Logan's arm, outloading the data the instant he made contact. Logan played the file. General Magnus, Fleet Commander Thalia, and several members of Magnus's staff crashed through the dimensional portal, escaping the Abraxian soldiers and the Machi Council trap. Magnus's combat armor instantly recognized that there was no atmosphere, so it immediately activated the helmet enclosure. This materialized and formed a seal around his head so he could breathe. Thalia's armor did the same thing. The other members of his command staff had, apparently, not followed his instruction on readiness. Their armor was not in combat configuration. Their heads were exploding out in a bloody gore fest, their bodies' internal pressure expanding out into the void through the path of least resistance. "Oh no!" Thalia yelled, trying to move to help them, but there was nothing she could do. Their bodies fell to the ground, headless, one after the other. Pop, 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 pop! Magnus watched, irritated. "Well, we have gravity, Fleet Commander," he said to Thalia through the helm's direct communication feed once the original chaos was over. She nodded back, looking around, trying to recover. "Where do you think we are?" Magnus looked around also. They were in what looked like the hangar on the Abraxian carrier they had captured. But this hangar did not show the same signs of conflict and repair as their captured one. Magnus motioned to the forward area. A set of corridors led away, the same configuration they had first encountered when they boarded the Abraxian flagship at the end of the last conflict in the Abraxian War. "Well, we know where those lead," Magnus said, stepping over the dead bodies and moving in the direction of the corridors. He allowed a small amount of irony to enter his voice. "What do you think, Fleet Commander? We can head up to the bridge, down to the Oldtech machinery, or stay on this level and head into the inner personnel areas where they keep the war tech." Thalia thought about it. She was working to push away the feelings of sadness at the shock of the other staff officers, surprised as always that nothing seemed to bother Magnus. She allowed her inner soldier to take over, forcing the other feelings down and feeding the anger she kept towards the Abraxians. If we're on one of their active carriers, we're probably in the outer system. This is probably a one-way trip. Let's head down to the Oldtech and blow this monstrosity sky high. Magnus smiled. He had genuine feelings for Thalia. She was the only officer he had ever encountered who met all of his very high standards. She reported to him early in her career and passed up several promotions to stay at his side. "I like it," he returned, also aware that this was probably the end of things. Well, the end of Thalia and Magnus anyway. The file ended. Logan looked over to X7. "Is there more?" "That ended before I could understand what happened to you." Logan could see the difference now in how X7 carried himself. He could see the similarities in speech and mannerisms between the man in the video datagram and the old X7. Magnus looked back. Once we entered the Oldtech area, the recording capability of the combat armor stopped working. We were overwhelmed and captured. I never saw Thalia again. I assume she went through the same abuse that I did. The Abraxians were ruthless once they finally got their hand on us. I would be more than happy to detail to you what I remember of the torture. But to save time, if you simply imagine every horrifying thing that can be done to the human body and mind, you will be in the right starting place. At the very end, when I was almost gone, they hooked me up to the Oldtech machine. As painfully and slowly as I believe they could, they separated my spirit from my body, peeling it away piece by piece. Making sure I was, well, what was left of me, they had cut some pieces off, making sure that I remained awake, aware throughout the entire process. Logan believed him and updated his codegrams, replacing X7 with Magnius in his primary index. If you are who you say you are, and the historical datagrams we researched are accurate, then we are lucky to have you. Logan paused, then noticed that Magnius had tried to outload an update to his system to extend military courtesies and view Magnius as a superior in rank and status. You want me to salute you? Logan recoiled from the codegram, rejecting it. Magnius smiled back, a gesture that an ethereal could do, but a combat android could not. You will find I am often testing your resolve and your battle status. You must be combat ready at all times. It rang hollow for Logan. He updated his index to include skepticism when analyzing Magnius's actions. Do not ever try and outload a codegram like that again to me without my permission. If you are interested in my combat readiness, doing that again will be your quickest path to a real-world evaluation. Good, Magnius said. He has the right fighting spirit and sense of self. He is trainable. The question is, will he be able to serve as my combat prime and follow my orders without rebellion or insubordination? Logan, Magnius continued, I would like to keep you as my combat prime. However, I need to know that I will have your loyalties. I will also need your help when informing Odessa that I am taking over as your clan prime. Okay, let's see where we stand, Magnius thought. Odessa never wanted to be a prime, Magnius, Logan said. That said, she is used to having a voice. You will need to convince her that you can bring more to the table than she can, and that you have a real plan for what we need to do. They are not real military. I am not going to be able to simply command them to do what I want. Logan and Odessa do seem to want to do the right thing. They understand the need to fight back, and they understand, I think, who the real enemy is. Magnius thought, Son, I do have a real plan, as you put it. More than that, I want the same things you and Odessa want. I might want it even more than you do. You were betrayed by our government, sent to be used up. He started to pace back and forth. I was betrayed as well by the same people. Yes, 100 cycles ago, but not for me. For me, it just happened yesterday. I have unfinished business just like you do. I fought and sacrificed my whole life as an MDF soldier, only to be sold out on the cusp of victory by the politicians, by the truth-tellers. To the Abraxians, I want to take it all back. With your help, Logan, we will secure this planet Alethea, destroy the Abraxians once and for all, and then take back our home moon for the people. Logan turned to look at Magnius, who had walked over to the other side of the room. Magnius, you may be a brilliant general, but we don't have the resources to do any of that. We just barely survived the small Abraxian fleet they sent, a few gunships. There is no doubt that they will send a larger war party now. They have the numbers and resources. We won't survive a real attack, and to try and counterattack, we would need a fleet to match theirs. All we have is a couple thousand outdated combat androids and an equal complement of low-level ethereals. Magnius walked back quickly, energized. He made a fist with one hand to emphasize his point. Logan, I have a fleet equal to anything the Abraxians will throw at us. I have tens of thousands of combat androids. I have thousands of Wartech machines, hundreds of combat spaceships, and I have an Abraxian carrier, one that used to be their flagship. The carrier has an Oldtech machine on it, like the one they used on me and the ones you destroyed here on the planet. Through the Oldtech machine, we can access the Soul Repository. We can liberate all of the life spirits the repository still holds. Hundreds of thousands. Logan was caught off guard. How can you have a fleet close to what you claim? The skeptical crossroads were kicking in. Where is it? You have been gone for over 100 cycles. Magnius was utterly energized. We hid the fleet around Hunkal, the innermost planet to the Luminary. We set up a sub-network broadcast. I am still receiving it. The fleet is intact, waiting for me. Logan was still in disbelief. So you can just call it from here, and magically we'll have a massive military fleet at our disposal. Magnius smiled again, lowering his intensity. No, it's not that easy, Logan. We couldn't risk someone else sending a command and gaining control of the fleet. The ships and androids there will only respond to me, and then only once I provide the pre-established datagram outloads to them. I have to go there, in person, and retrieve it for us. We also built a spaceborne shipyard. It can be moved to Alethea too. We can use all the salvage you have collected here to refit ships and to use the salvage to assemble new ships. With the power of our fleet and the resources we have here, we can declare Alethea a sovereign planet, declare ourselves a new sovereign people. Logan was still skeptical. He checked, and it wasn't just the new criteria he put in place. The whole story deserved skepticism. There are only 10,000 of us. How can we be a sovereign planet with barely a population? Magnus smiled. It was odd to see X7's face used with such human emotions. Didn't you hear me, Logan? You simply must start listening closely when I talk. I do not have a lot of patience for repeating myself. I just told you through the Oldtech on the carrier we have access to the soul repository. It's nearly an endless well of Mashi souls. We can restore many of the ones the Abraxians have taken using the same technology they used. Only they used it for evil. We will use it for good. Magnus had turned away again. Logan brought several of his subarrays in to cross-load the data Magnus was providing. Near instantly, a problem showed up. Even if that is true, I don't think it's ethical to bring them back and put their spirits into machines, like you and I. I don't think we want to father a race of super machine. I like the idea of tens of thousands of combat androids under my command, but I already have that. Logan is correct. That would not be the best way to go, Magnus deliberated. Magnus turned back around, genuinely thinking about the concept. You're right, I think. We can't bring back people as machines. We don't need human spirits in the existing combat androids or ethereals. They will follow our commands better without human conciseness. But you agree we owe it to our people to save them. As do I. They looked at each other for a few moments, both trying to come up with a better alternative. Finally, Logan said, I don't have a better answer. We have a group, roughly half, that wants to leave. Magnus had kept the comms feeds open to hear the conversations, so he knew what had been asked. Should I try and tell Logan about it? Would it help convince him? Better yet, we could take all the dissenters and wipe them, then insert loyal spirits into them. I am a genius. If it comes to that, I am going to keep that option open. Instead of his inner thoughts, he tried to work out more realistic options. We could modify some of the primates here on the planet, infuse Mashi DNA into theirs, then transfer the Mashi spirits into them. Logan was surprised. What about the souls of the primates? Magnus had it figured out. He could manipulate the situation. I don't think they have souls in the same way we do. But either way, we can test some different species in the machine and see for ourselves. If they turn out to be empty vessels, we'll have a good answer. And if not, Logan asked, unsure. Then, Logan, we will have a few more interesting decisions to make. Chapter 10. Truth? Logan wanted to talk to Odessa, but Magnus would not let him. He had everything locked down, and the situation was static. There was enough food for all the bios for the next several weeks. They could exist comfortably in the locked-down underground living area for that amount of time. Kara and Franklin were separated and did not have access to any technology. The E2 units were under Magnus's control. The shielding over the base was intact and functioning. No Abraxian fleet had been detected. Anything they sent would be visible in the sky for weeks before it arrived. Magnus had installed in the E2s the same lockdown codegrams he apparently had used on his fleet 100 cycles ago. Whatever it was, Logan could not break it. He had tried repeatedly until all possible permutations were attempted and failed. After a few more conversations, Magnus was apparently comfortable with the stability of the situation. He and a small group of E2s took a scout ship to return to the fleet around Hunkal. Logan was left to his own devices, trustworthy enough, it seemed. He had the entire battalion of combat androids at his disposal, but really nothing for them to do. The idea of trying to smash through the inner defenses and release Odessa and the rest of the people crossed his mind. But he was willing to wait at least a couple weeks to see if Magnus was telling the truth about the fleet and if he would return. Using the androids would be an overt sign of insubordination, and while that time may come, he did not feel this was it. While Logan was skeptical concerning Magnus, he did believe him overall. He believed Magnus was doing what he thought was best to help Logan and the clan. Their primary differences seemed to be more in the means, not in the ends. Logan decided to use the time to further survey Alethea. They had good data and analytics about the planet. Still, as he learned on their original entry flight, it is sometimes better to use your own eyes and see things for yourself than rely on technology. The planet was vast and still held many secrets. He left most of the combat androids on patrol outside the shielding and had a few follow to stay in communications configuration, extending the range of the peer-to-peer comms network. Hence, he was never out of contact with the situation on the home front. He found hundreds of large cities like the old city they had initially discovered in surveying the planet. There had been significant populations with substantive agriculture, technology, and cultural sophistication. It wasn't Oldtech. Nevertheless, he knew the Oldtech Abraxian ships had used formations found in these old cities to somehow interact and control the soulless. There was a link, but he could not figure out what it was, so he kept working at it. As Magnius had detected, the planet was home to dozens of primates, some biologically along the same lines as Machians. It would be possible to genetically modify them, as had been proposed. Initially, the idea seemed so foreign to Logan that he had dismissed it, allowing his broader skepticisms of Magnius to overshadow the proposal. After more cross-loading and thinking, the idea of engineering a biological home for the tens of thousands of souls ripped from people over the past millennia, but not yet consumed as food energy, had significant merit. He also noted that Magnius seemed able to cut through concepts and ideas and identify the core of the matter. He did not have as many artificial processing boundaries as Logan did. I am making my decision processing a lot harder than it needs to be. I might disagree with him or not reach the same conclusions, but still, I can learn from the analytical process that Magnius follows, although I wish there were someone I could talk to. I miss being able to speak with Odessa. She always was grounded and very practical. On a whim, Logan scanned the frequency that Gax had used to contact him several months ago. To his surprise, the frequency was still open and transmitting from the exact location they had met at. He altered his course and flew to the island. As he got close, his scanners picked up the presence of a Batorian. The data matched the readings Logan had taken of Gax when they last met. Just as before, he had his escort combat androids remain airborne some ways off, and he made his way to the island location alone. As he neared, he saw Gax. The big Batorian had built a structure from the surrounding foliage. He was wearing modest coverings, not his combat armor. There was little technology near him, and Logan's scans did not identify any weapons or other old tech. Gax watched Logan approach, waving his hand, recognizing who it was. B-99? You returned to Gax because you are lost? Did your internal directional system fall out from disrepair? Gax had a smile on his face. Logan landed, making a motion to Gax's surroundings. I take it you have fallen from grace with your Abraxian overlords? Gax followed Logan's gesture, indicating the same area but with reverence, not scorn. Yes, I led them to disaster. I tried to guess what B-99 would do and counter it, and I was wrong. He smiled. His demeanor and his words were not necessarily aligned. I saw the battle fleet heading your way a week ago. They thought they could handle you where I could not. Seeing you brings me great joy. It shows I was right, and they were wrong. Logan walked over to Gax. The vantage point had visibility of the ocean and a large part of the island. It was green and lush with vegetation. There were sandy white beaches, and the ocean water was bright blue, reflecting the luminary as it slowly made its way across the sky. Why did they allow you to live? My impression is that the Abraxians do not often overlook failure. Gax smiled, his wide mouth showing rows of teeth. You are accurate, B-99, but I have done much for them. They have a sense of fairness in themselves. Not like you are used to with the governments of the Five Moons, but it is there. I served them and was loyal to the end. In exchange, instead of death, or worse, they banished me here, to die alone with time as the weapon. Logan adjusted his scans, and sure enough, while Gax did have his armor stored in his makeshift living structure, the ability to use the magnetic or frequency drive to leave the island was missing. He had no way off and was truly trapped here. Seems overly generous of them, Gax, Logan said. I will grow to resent them over time as I am trapped here. Gax's smile faded. But for now, I am thankful. This has been a vacation for Gax. And now that I know B99 beat them too, well, maybe they will change their minds and come and reinstate me. Do you really believe that? B99, your memory units are wired backward. I have already explained things to you. If I truly believe it, then it is true. Gax did not look convinced in his own assertion. Logan concluded that Gax probably did not really believe that there was a chance the Abraxians would return for him and free him from his island prison. As Gax suggested then, that possibility was not genuine if he only said it. He needed to honestly believe it as well. Actually, Gax, I have a question for you about truth, like we talked about before. Gax sat down on a tree stump from a tree he had cut down to make his shelter. He waved his hand, suggesting Logan continue, that he was listening. Logan said, "You told me before that truth was what you believed, really believed, not what was said or what you hoped to be true. Are you trying to confirm for me that your rusty memory circuits still function, B99? Of course, I remember telling you that." Okay, Gax, fine. But what if you don't know? What if you are trying to figure out if a person is telling the truth and you have not decided if they are or not? What if you don't know what to believe? How does that fit into your model? Gax looked out over the ocean. Good, B99. You have made me happy again. I thought maybe you were just a dumb rust bucket who could not remember anything from one moment to the next. Your question is good. It shows you have been cross-loading and thinking. Do you remember what else I told you about truth? Yes, Gax. You said that truth could be two things at once, that it could be different for you and different for me, but that both were still the truth. Good. You were paying attention. However, have you analyzed the implications of that statement? Have you thought through what it means completely? Logan knew he had tried, but didn't get anywhere with it. This is where I need your help. Gax made a serious face. Okay, the little robot showed promise, but doesn't live up to it. I will help you. Gax the Scholar is what they will call me now. I used to be Gax the Warrior, but they lost faith in me. I never lost faith, though. I still know I am a warrior. Now I know I am a scholar also. This is a glorious day for Gax. I am now two things. Are you ready, B99? Run your diagnostics, so we know you will hear me and understand. I do not have the energy to repeat myself. Irritation flashed through Logan, but it faded quickly. He was learning Gax well enough to understand he was trying to make a point. Gax continued, "Here is more wisdom from Scholar Gax. Truth is an irrelevant premise." Logan didn't understand. What? Truth is the foundation for everything. It's not irrelevant. Is it, B99? Gax made a show of false enlightenment. I realize you have obsolete components, but how can truth be the foundation to everything if you can't even figure out what it is? If you cannot identify it when you see it? Logan wanted to give Gax's ideas merit, so he sent the recursion processing to his advanced Series 8 system arrays. However, they didn't fare any better in making sense of the idea that truth is irrelevant. After a few moments of cross-loading, Logan answered, "You are going to have to explain things to me, Gax. I don't know if it is my hardware as you suggest, but I cannot find any logic tree that can process your suggestions." Gax stood up, agitated. "These are not suggestions. I have hundreds of cycles of experiences. I have worked for the Abraxians firsthand, dealt with their ways and means." He calmed himself and sat back down. "B99, I forget that you are a child. You stand tall but think small. I will help you. What else do I have to do? I will talk as long as I can stand your ignorance." Gax stood back up and walked over to the edge of the rise again, looking out at the ocean. "Pay attention, Rust Bucket. You are lucky to have me to explain this. I fear I will not have the patience to do this again, so turn on your jumbled recording sensors and try to shake your little brain loose from years of neglect. Here we go. Is it true that you were born?" "Yes," Logan answered. He had been through this process before and understood how Gax tried to explain what he felt were complex topics and ideas. "Do you remember being born?" "No, but you believe it to be true." "Yes. Before you were born, did you also believe it to be true?" Logan paused, his cross-loading hitting a contradiction. He started to send the cross-load to the advanced processors, but Gax spoke before he could. "B99!" Gax yelled, surprising Logan and showing real frustration. Use your spirit consciousness to answer, not your ancient defective processors. Logan adjusted his processing to appease him. I don't understand the question then, Gax. Gax threw his arms up. It's a simple question. If you can't participate now, you will never understand. I'll ask it slower. Before you were born, Gax asked the same question, but spoke slower, as if that would help. Did you believe it to be true? I didn't believe anything, Gax. I wasn't around. Gax himself paused and looked at the ground. Okay, I think I see your first problem. You don't understand the flow of time. You don't understand how time relates to truth. I don't, Gax, I suppose. That is why I am here giving you something to do. Gax began to smile, his tooth-filled smile. Fair enough, B99. I'll answer for you. You did not believe it was true. You say you were not around. I don't have time to explain life to you as well as truth, but I do need you to think. If you conclude that you were not around, then you did not believe that you had been born when you had not, correct? Logan actually understood. Correct. I understand your point now. Not how this helps me with my query, but I understand your point as it relates to the question. You are making me work to help you, Rust Bucket. So let's continue. You now believe you were born. You believed it after you were born, but not before you were born. Because you believe it now, it is true. You were born. Since you did not believe it before you were born, it was not true then. Do you understand so far? Yes, I understand. I don't see the application, but I understand. Good, my dense child friend. So my next question, what changed? What do you mean, what changed? We just talked about it. Before I was born, the fact I was born was not true. After I was born, the fact I was born was true. So what changed? Logan was frustrated. What changed? I was born. That's what changed. No, Gax yelled loudly, extremely agitated. He turned and walked away, shaking his head, trying to get himself back in control. What? Logan exclaimed, surprised again at Gax's frustration. Showing an effort to calm himself, Gax turned. Truth cannot change, B99. You still don't even understand the question you asked. If you don't understand your own question, how can you understand the answer? You told me yourself last time we talked that the problem with the truth was that it could change, Gax. Logan was himself becoming unsettled. You said it blows in the wind. Gax extended both his arms, shaking his hands, calming himself. B99, I forget how stupid you are. That is not what I said. I have always tried to help you understand things. I said that truth changes over time. Over time, it blows in the wind. Over time, in an instant, truth can change around you. So I ask again, hoping desperately for a correct answer before I have to disassemble you. What changed? Logan again understood now. Time changed. Great maker, and all that is sacred. Gax put his hands to his head in an over-exaggerated show of enlightenment. Time changed. He said it relatively softly, given how he spoke, like he heard the concept expressed as a new idea. Time changed. So add that to our model. Truth can be different for you and me. Truth can be different as time changes. Gax gathered himself again. I hope I have the strength for this next part. It is not the end. We are barely through the beginning. Here we go. If there are an infinite number of questions about what is true, if time is endless, then for just one truth, even though nearly an infinite number of things could be true or not, but for just one, how many permutations of truth are there? Let me continue to frame the question for you so you do not cause me a mental breakdown before you bumble into your first silly, irritating answer. It is a child's question. What is infinity times infinity? Gax looked spent. Logan answered right away, so he was not accused of cross-loading. I'm not falling for that question, Gax. I accepted what you told me earlier because it solved a contradiction. Truth can be two things at once. I understand that. It can be good for you and bad for me. I get it. But time, while it changes, is only ever one thing at any moment. It is not infinite, like you say, not when it comes to truth. It might be ever-changing, but it is never more than one thing in any one moment. Gax jerked his head up, looking intently at Logan. Then how was it over time that your birth changed from false to true? Because it happened. So, truth can only be false until it happens. Logan's entire internal processing arrays lit up. He was flooded with possibilities as he introduced this concept into all the work he had been doing to understand Gax and evaluate Magnus. This new concept solved everything. and it explained why Gax had said truth was irrelevant. No, I understand now. Truth is irrelevant because it can only be valid after the fact. After something real happens, you can't know the truth before the fact, only after. Trying to use truth as an evaluative condition when cross-loading future events can never work because nothing is ever true until after. The variable never changes. It is not false, it is simply not true. There are 3 conditions for truth, not 2. The truth variable can be false, true, or not true. So, for any analysis, the odds are that what you are examining is either false or not true. There is less chance something is ever true, and only then can it only ever be true after it happens. So the analysis is irrelevant, Logan concluded, feeling proud of himself and appreciating his vast new understanding. Gax stood up, his smile back, but the smile was different this time. Logan realized that before Gax was not smiling, he was grimacing. B99, you have graduated from the school for obedient dogs to the school for small children that have a hard time learning. Logan laughed. Even Gax's jokes made more sense now. Thank you, Gax, Logan said, meaning it. I will use this information, and I have days of processing to do with it. However, all that said, this new understanding still does not actually help me. There is some practical application here, but I still need to determine if an ether reel in our clan is acting helpfully or unhelpfully. Logan had learned something, rephrasing his quandary now about Magneus, using a more correct paradigm. Do you see, B99? What you just said, see how much easier it is now to understand the world. You could have asked that about me before. It may have saved you hardship. You asked if I was good or bad. You should have asked if I was helpful or unhelpful. Looking back, you can see that I was helpful, given where you now are. To your quandary, I do not know, and I do not want to spend my time having you explain things to me so that I can make the determination for you. Instead, I will be helpful in another way, but I want something in return. Gax walked over to the view of the ocean again. His demeanor was different. He was talking to Logan more as a peer now, his speech pattern less severe. I cannot promise you anything, Gax. You are still my enemy, I think. However, you have been helpful, given me something real, so I will extend you the courtesy of considering your request. Please make it. Without turning around, Gax said, Here is what I want. I want to join your clan and help you against the Abraxians. Not for why, you may think. I believe the Abraxians are only an obstacle. I believe after you deal with them, you will attack the 5 moons. They are the real enemy. Their civilization is corrupt. Their governments are corrupt. There is no saving them. Only by reforming them will civilization be saved. But no reformation can happen as long as they are ruled by tyrants. Logan was not surprised by this request. He had expected it on some level. As he just learned, there was no way to know if Gax was truthful. The available question to ponder is, was he being helpful? What do you offer in return? Gax turned around, looking at Logan directly, his eyes blazing. His smile was genuine and prominent on his face as he started to speak. Chapter 11. Hunkal Magnius felt good. His actual body was probably gone, disposed of 100 cycles ago, after the Abraxians sucked the remaining life out of it and ripped away his soul. It had been a good body, but even before the abuse of the Abraxian Oldtech machine, it had been aging. There were probably several good years left on it, but it had been getting harder to keep it in shape. Even the most conditioned biological form could only take so much abuse and return from so many wounds. This ethereal body, though, was amazing. It felt like his natural body, mostly. It lacked the chemical makeup, but that turned out to be a good thing. He didn't have his body flooding with compounds that clouded or influenced his analytical thinking. And it was strong. He could move as quickly as he wanted and exert strength independent of effort. The devices customarily reserved for combat armor were built in. He could activate arm bracings anytime he wanted. He could start separate flight systems, magnetic or frequency, just by thinking about them. Most interestingly, he could access the onboard processing components and mechanical storage arrays as quickly as his own thoughts. He found he could take something he was thinking about, hand it over to an ancillary processing core, and be notified when a conclusion was reached. He could scale this to nearly unlimited scope, keeping his primary self free and clear for the here and now. At the same time, thinking through thousands of ideas and options for everything, anything. He realized it was as if he now had direct access and control over his biological subconscious. Only a more powerful one that did not require sleep and dozens of hours to work through an idea or two. He could work through thousands all at once. His ship was a week out from Alethea and another week out from Hunkal, the innermost planet. It's boring here by myself. I've gone through all the data this X7 unit has. I need access to the Machi archives and history to come current and devise a real strategy and plan. Magnus walked the ship. He moved from the storage area through the empty living quarters on the first deck, up the second deck ramp, the few adjoining corridors, the communications room, and the central control room. The scout he had taken was one of the older ones, but not so old that it did not have a fabric connection to the ether. He gambled that it would be easier in the older ship to avoid the fabric traceback signals. He needed to gain access to the large data pools and codegrams available in the massive system-wide network. He worked for days to configure the communication equipment until he was sure he could activate it while still keeping his signal anonymous and untraceable. When he was finally ready, he walked to the communication room and turned everything on. It was a rush of overwhelming scope, like falling off a cliff into the void between mountains. Going from standing on the ground in control to wind and space at the mercy of gravity. After a few moments, his cores adjusted. I'm lucky that this X7 unit already has profound experience connecting to the ether. This will save me days or more. Magnus shifted his input to visual, a more data-rich method to understand the deep data sets available. He instructed the comms system to present fabric navigation as a two-dimensional menu to him. The system complained this was not an optimized interactive protocol. Still, Magnus would not suffer complaints from his peers or subordinates, certainly not from an 80-cycle-old scout ship artificial intelligence. He navigated to a geospatial overlay of the luminary, putting current known political, governmental factions, trade routes, and military capabilities as projections onto the map. Snickering to himself, he thought, this was the right way to view the data for sure. The local AI gave me bad advice. Remember that. I can instantly see what is going on here in the 100 cycles I have been away. The luminary showed at the center. There were 3 concentric circles, each wrapping the planets, dwarfs, asteroids, moons, and stations that danced about the luminary, locked into their gravity wells and rotating orbits. The innermost circle, where he was now, started at the center and extended out just past Alethea. This was categorized as a resource and production zone. There seemed little interest in it, no military bases and few production facilities. The planet Alethea was marked as mineral resources and energy crop production. Magnus knew an energy crop was how the Abraxians viewed the souls of the people they extracted. The next circle out was the dominant circle, the prime of civilization. The giant ice planet Taio was at the nexus of the circle, its moons spinning around it. There were hundreds of military bases, destination dwarfs, floating industrial centers, and transit systems in the dominant circle. The area did not look substantively different from the last time Magnus saw it. Then he had a thought. There is a difference. 100 cycles ago, there were 5 militaries, and they each coveted and defended different resource centers. Now that's gone. It has been unified. The entire zone is a shared space with no distinctions to which government of which moon is claiming control. He flipped through several overlays of the data, searching for any remnant of the old hierarchy. There was nothing substantial, only governmental branding basically, no underlying structural differences. The separate moons had their flags around, leaving civilians to possibly believe there were individual societies. Still, nothing about them, other than their labels, held any distinction. The communications chatter, datagrams, underlying subtleties, and control points were identical across the dominant circle. But something doesn't make sense. Suppose the Abraxians control everything, and all the governments have been compromised. Why are they allowed to keep the military in place at all? Magnus expanded the view out to the outer circle, the home of the Abraxians. The system provided more information on it than he had ever seen before. He had fought the Abraxians and won, but never knew the true scope of their empire. Highlighted in the outer circle were transportation routes heading out of the luminary and deeper into space. The Abraxians had shifted their military boundaries and borders. They were defending the entire luminary from an attack from outside the system, not from the dominant circle where the civilization of the Five Moons resided or anywhere else inside the system. Magnus studied the information intensely. The Abraxians were no lost civilization fading from existence. They had a vibrant and significant society and military force, complete with industrialized production, living regions, government and administrative complexes, shipyards, and what looked like huge data processing centers. He zoomed in to the data here and there, discovering that while they were using the Oldtech, the facilities were not manufacturing it. They were deploying it and repairing it, but not making it. Let's see if I can find any information on their plans for Aletheia now that we have disrupted their immediate counterattack. He had to search for a while. The datagrams were accessible, but buried deep in the pools, Aletheia holding little apparent interest or priority. The first trace he found was a second dispatch, issued just a few days ago, in response to the defeat of the attack fleet Magnius had orchestrated. Apparently, a reserve facility on the planet's moon was created for just this scenario, including a significant fighting array of ships in a deep hangar under the lunar surface. The dispatch was for personnel. They were sending in tens of thousands of Abraxian warriors to activate the facility. He quickly ran some crossloads. Sure enough, if able to use the full scale of the hidden resources, the Abraxians' warriors could easily overwhelm the current friendly forces, including all combat androids, ethereals, and modified scout ships still on the planet. Once I have my fleet, do I even care about the planet or the Machians there? He wasn't conflicted. That wasn't how Magnius thought. He was legitimately weighing the pros and cons of the situation. He would return if it made the most strategic sense. He would not if there was a better option. Logan won't see the troop dispatch coming. It will be concealed, a small set of ships hidden in approach. The Abraxians are not willing to reallocate physical assets from the Outer Rim defenses. Are they expecting a problem soon? What did that tell him? He thought for a while, processing scenarios using both his system cores and his primary consciousness. He also reanalyzed the tactical situation. The inner circle of planets enjoyed the protection from whatever this outside force was, just like the rest of the luminary. The dominant circle was protected and also had significant non-Abraxian military assets. There was no information anywhere about any external threat. Where that situation was managed, it did not share space with the fabric or ether. The Abraxians were sure to have their own network. They were keeping elements of their activities strictly there and away from the administrative capabilities of the Five Moons governments. Well, at this point then, I'm going to assume that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, Magnius thought. Aletheia and the Inner Circle were the most strategic non-Abraxian control location. It provided a more defensible position than the dominant circle since it was bordered on two sides. The Inner Circle had only one border. We already have a foundation on Aletheia. We have production facilities, a labor force, food production, and some semblance of military readiness. It makes more sense to get the fleet and return to Aletheia than to attempt to re-establish all assets again, with less time and fewer resources at my disposal. The scout ship continued on its arching course to the inner planet. Magnius did not need sleep or rest, so he studied and researched different topics and ideas in the comms room. He came across a file marked as confidential. It looked like a feed from some other external system. The subject was some type of contingency plan by the Abraxians concerning whatever forces were marshaled outside the luminary system. He converted it to a visual feed and examined its contents. It seemed that there was something about the dominant circle that was valuable. Whatever the Abraxians were doing, they were exploiting something here that some other force wanted. It was unclear what it was, only just that it was valuable for the Abraxians, and it would be detrimental if they lost control of it. The datagram showed a contingency plan to destroy Tayo, the colossal ice planet, thus destroying the Five Moons. He followed several different scenarios. It looked like Mashi could survive the explosion since it was the farthest out in its wide orbit. The physical moon would endure, but not the civilization. This would turn it from living Machi to dead Mars. The other moons would all be destroyed in the process. Since Tayo mainly was ice, it would deliver a tidal wave of water across the luminary, causing a band of asteroids in place of its current orbit over time. Under this scenario, it seemed the Abraxians would abandon the system and return in 10,000 cycles when the system had recovered from the blast. The other interesting realization was that the Abraxians did not seem to care at all about Alethea. The group there with Odessa and Logan believed they were fighting some righteous war of the rebellion, but the Abraxians were not engaged. They had only the mildest interest in the inner planets. Their focus was outside the system. Clearly, they did know what was going on. The datagram maps and data pools he accessed showed they were not oblivious. It was just that the priority and concern were so low that the activities barely registered. For example, after more research, Magnus was able to conclude that the group of swarm soldiers being sent to the resupply depot on the planet's moon were simply the next round of soldiers on rotation, not some special force racing against time as he had originally thought. It was also clear that the Abraxians, nor anyone else, were monitoring the fabric connections in some desperate activity to find the rebellious planet-based forces. They knew where they were and what they were doing. Magnus could use the fabric to contact Logan without worry if he wanted to. He decided he did want to, so he created a recurring signal ping that Logan would receive the moment he checked his ether message queues. A few days later, the fleet was visible on the forward viewport. It was right where he left it. Magnificent. The android units he left in his place had been busy. They were still following his orders. So many new ships had been built, many other vessels fixed, enhanced, and/or repaired. The Oldtech carrier glistened. It looked new. As the scout ship finally approached the carrier, it prepared to dock. "Permission to come aboard," Magnus said as the outer hatch opened. "Granted," the Prime Combat android said to him, standing there looking new and polished, nearly oblivious to the passage of time. "What is your designation, Combat Prime?" Magnus asked. "Thank you, sir. Alpha 1, Prime 1, sir. So A1, abbreviated, sir." Magnus connected to the Oldtech systems and the newer system that A1 had installed in his 100-cycle stewardship. Things were in top order. "Very impressive, A1. You followed my orders perfectly, even extending shipyard production against some interpreted parameters with outstanding results. Were there any challenges?" A1 was beaming with pride. "No, sir. We have remained undiscovered while still making low-yield raids for shipbuilding resources when we needed to. Your orders were excellently conceived. It has been an honor implementing them." The android had continued to build new ships after the repairs were completed on existing ships. A1 also continued a research and development program, refitting and updating guidance systems, ship drives, and weapon systems as new innovations emerged or as they were observed as capabilities on any of the vessels they encountered in their raids. The fleet contingent was impressive now. Ships from the flagship carrier to larger fighting ships, ships of the line, gunships, and smaller, fast skirmishers. With the fleet's readiness understood, Magnus returned to his thoughts about the situation and formulating new plans. "Is the carrier's Oldtech transfer facility still operational?" "Yes, sir," said A1. "We have been able to reverse engineer, to a degree anyway, the Oldtech technology. We still cannot reproduce it, but we have been able to install a datagram class loader and we have indexed the system." Suddenly, Maginus's fabric comms system rang alive. Logan had received his ping and was responding. "Magnus, I assume you have concluded using the fabric comms is safe?" Logan asked as soon as the frequency opened. "There is a touch of insubordination here. However, security is a top concern. He does not have the information I do, so it is not wholly unwarranted," Magnus thought to himself. He responded, "Logan, I don't have time for an extended audible speak exchange. I am going to send you several datagrams with a summary of what I have learned. Once you cross-load them, I have provided instructions for you to the next course of action." Magnus terminated the feed. "A1, let's get down to the Oldtech machine. We have a lot of work to do," he said as he started walking, knowing the way. Chapter 12, Race the Moon. As time passed, the group trapped inside the underground city had organized themselves into two camps: those who wanted to leave, led by Lashera, and those who did not want to leave, led by Odessa. It wasn't Odessa's intention to facilitate division. Still, it was the only way to deal with Lashera and her constant insurgent ramblings. There was little to do otherwise. All outside communications feeds were still down. They had no equipment capable of tunneling out. No number of attempts were able to crack the security, keeping the doors and exits blocked. There was plenty of food and air. Over the next few days, but that was it. Odessa had fallen into a deep depression. She was despondent and melancholy. I should have tried other means with the soulless survivors. Killing 5,000 people was reckless. What does it say about me? I made a terrible choice. She worked through her inner thoughts, going in circles with the same thoughts over and over again. Somehow, Lashera had picked up on Odessa's inner turmoil, and Lashera had given several impassioned speeches, basically labeling Odessa as a murderer. Somehow, many of the people that wanted to stay still listened to the sermons, and a good number of them seemed to believe the accusations. For those who wanted to leave, thinking Odessa was a murderer was an easy way to justify their existing feelings. Was there another way? They were attacking everyone, hunting in packs, biting people to death. What else could I have done? The base was under attack as well. I never even wanted to be a leader. No one else would do it, so I did. But I got thousands of people killed. Worse, I killed thousands of people. Suddenly, Logan was on her communication frequency. Odessa, I have good news. Good news? What could he be talking about? Why did he abandon me in the first place, leaving me stranded here underground for so many days? Anger swelled up, replacing her melancholy. Logan, I have not heard from you for days. We're in a desperate way. I had to. She trailed off and then continued. I have had to do things to save the clan that I am not sure about. I could have used your help. Logan seemed caught off guard. You have been safe underground. I don't understand what you are worried about. Odessa broke. Are you kidding me? She yelled, jumping to her feet. She was currently back in the park where the massacre had happened. She found she was drawn to this place, spending a lot of her time here while waiting. Do you know what I have had to do? I had to murder 5,000 people. Our people, Logan. Some were old, some were young. I can still see each of their faces as they fell. She started pacing and continued. And then you locked us in here. Look, the bodies are starting to decay. What are we to do with them? On top of that, half the people trapped in here want to leave. I'm sure everyone wants to leave, Odessa. I can explain everything. Like I said, I have good news. Odessa had lost her patience. She quoted him. I'm sure everyone wants to leave? That's what you say to me? You need to listen. Half of the clan we rescued want to leave the planet and return to Machi. The idea that the people would have a choice did not even occur to Logan in his response. That's ridiculous, Odessa. We're not going to allow anyone to leave the planet at this point. As if that was an answer to Odessa's concerns. Odessa paused. There was something odd about that statement. Then she had it. Wait, what? Who is we? Without missing a beat, he replied, General Magnus, Odessa. He is the spirit in X7. But I have good news too, better than that news, which I agree is pretty good, but there is more. Odessa's head was spinning. Logan was not acting like the man she knew. She looked out to the underground structures. People were starting to gather in the park, drawn in by her yelling and exaggerated movements. They could tell something important was going on. Odessa could see Lashera approaching from a good way off as well. Logan, what do you mean the spirit in X7 is General Magnus? Are you sure you are okay? You don't sound like yourself. There was a short pause, then, Odessa, I want you to come with me. I am going to leave everyone else in the secured area for a little bit longer. I can explain everything. You will be happy. Things worked out well for us, better than we could have hoped. Meet me at the causeway. I will let you out. If anyone asks, you can tell them that everything will be explained and the underground exits will be reopened before the end of the day. Odessa stood still for a few moments, looking at the ground, then looked up at the growing number of people gathered, all staring at her. More than half with suspicion and disdain. Whatever, she thought. If they are so upset with me, let them hope Lashera gets them what they want. I never wanted anything but the best for everyone. It was an impossible situation, and I did the best I could. Before Lashera arrived and the growing crowd became unruly, Odessa walked away from the open space. As she got nearly out of earshot, she could begin to hear uncomplimentary calls after her. She had left just in time to avoid a significant confrontation. Eventually, she reached the causeway exit. Logan was standing there. Odessa was surprised that she did not have a moment of relief upon seeing him, but he looked foreign now. A combat android, not her brother anymore, but something else. He raised a hand to wave it, an unnecessary gesture, Odessa realized, designed to elicit her emotion. "Odessa, it is good to see you," Logan said, putting his arm down when she did not return the gesture. Odessa walked right past him and started the long walk across the causeway to the hangar. Logan watched her go past him, turned, and fell into step with her. "Odessa, I have good news. I have been trying to tell you." She was still angry. "Yes, I know. So what is it? Just tell me instead of telling me you want to tell me." She stopped dead in her tracks. Gax was standing at the far end of the ramp. "Is that Gax?" Logan put a gentle hand on her shoulder to stop her from walking. "Odessa, stop. You need to listen. A lot has happened that I need to tell you about." They both stopped roughly at the midpoint of the bridge-like walkway. They were in a sizable cavernous area, lit by the technology and lights they had installed. She pushed his hand away, holding back both rage and tears. "What? Go ahead, I am all ears." Her posture was defiant, but she was finally listening. Logan knew he was missing all kinds of nonverbal information. Still, he believed Odessa would come around once she finally got the chance to hear all of the new information. Logan started. "Where did you get X7 and E7 from?" he asked Odessa, wanting to get this part out of the way. "I know you had to pull some strings, and you used what clout we had with the local Mashi councils. I was always impressed you were able to get 2 of the units given our clan's reduced stature." She was partially caught off guard by the question, having forgotten the events leading up to their mining contract. "What? Oh, right. They had been impounded and were labeled as experimental, not to be used. They were evidence for something, but I didn't research what. Instead, I worked through some back channels, got their designations taken out of the suppressed list, and had them administratively assigned to us as if we had had them for a long time." Logan nodded. "Well, they were part of an Abraxian experiment to see if they could conduct spirit transfers. X7 is where they put Magnius after they captured him. He believes E7 is his first officer, a fleet commander named Thalia. We will need to bring her out next and see what she remembers." "What does it matter what she remembers? The Oldtech facilities here were destroyed by us." Logan would have smiled to reassure her, but he, of course, could not. "Odessa, I need to give you a lot of information. There is no good way to do it, and no good order to do it. So just let me tell you everything, then we can discuss it and see if you agree with what I want to do. Okay?" She crossed her arms as if to say, "Go ahead, I'm listening, even though I already don't believe you." Logan started. "Okay, let me work backward a little. Starting at the end, it turns out that the Abraxians are not overly interested in us or in the planet here, Alethea. Alethea might have been an important facility at one time, providing souls that kept the Abraxians alive, but now, with the Great Resolution, they can transform people at will, it seems. Alethea is a secondary source at best." Before he could continue, she interrupted. "How is that good news?" He reached out with his hand again and put it on her shoulder to calm her. "Let me finish everything. I'm not suggesting the Luminary is now a perfect place. It isn't. We have a lot of work to do, but the fight is different than we thought, and our vulnerability and resources are different than you know." Odessa looked away angrily, but conveyed the idea that she would not interrupt again and that Logan should continue. "This whole time, I thought we were fighting an overwhelming force, that we were always just one step away from facing a war machine that would devastate us. Instead, we have been fighting the near-forgotten remnants of an expeditionary force, guarding low-priority assets." He made a gesture to Gax, standing far away. "The only reason it felt like we were up against more than we were is that Gax is a military genius, maybe on par with General Magnius. I don't know yet. We have the planet, Odessa. We have a military force now capable of protecting it. X7 has been acting so strange because the Oldtech machine awakened General Magnius's memories. It took some time for the two personalities to meld. The X7 we knew was basically Magnius's unconscious. X7 isn't gone. He always was Magnius. Now the two personalities are in harmony. Magnius has been full of surprises. It turns out he has a fleet he captured at the end of the first Abraxian conflict. Hundreds of ships now, many a unique configuration after 100 cycles of androids working to build and improve the designs. He has thousands of combat androids, a fleet carrier, and a mobile shipyard. Further, there is a massive surplus of ships and materials housed in a base on Alithia's moon. We easily intercepted a resupply transport of Abraxian swarm before they could access the facility. It's ours. Logan paused for some of this to sink in, but not so long that Odessa took the pause as a chance to ask questions. He needed to get her the rest of the information first, so he quickly continued. "The soulless you had to deal with here," he started. Odessa whipped her head around to look directly at him, a challenge on her face, as though he were about to discuss a topic that was not his to discuss. Logan saw and understood the look, but kept going. They were just the empty bodies. There was nothing genuinely alive inside them. Magnius has an Oldtech machine on the carrier. He was able to access the list, inventory, and spirits held within the entire Abraxian system. There are hundreds of thousands of souls. We can return them to a living body. When you protected the rest of the clan from the soulless carnage, you were saving lives, not taking them. Some of this gets a little complicated, but let me tell you everything else. Magnius has the idea to genetically modify, over several generations, some of the primate biologicals here on Alethea. We can transform them into good bodies and use the Oldtech machines as a well of souls, to slowly, over time, return them to the living. Since Magnius and I are now in automation, our lifespan will be exceedingly long. We can steward the work for tens of thousands of cycles to return the balance to the luminary and reinstate the majority of the people taken. If we need to, we can search the data pools and find specific people who were taken and restore them to automations like myself or Magnius, to a combat android or ethereal. There is no reason to believe that when the time is right, if they want, we can't transfer them from the automaton to a natural biological. They can have a normal life at the end of the long process. Odessa was staring at him now. It was impossible to read her emotions or thoughts. Her look bordered on incongruence or disbelief, but there was a sense of impossibilities realized in her gaze as well. Logan continued, "Let me finish everything. We are almost there. Then we can discuss some things. There are some challenges. The Abraxian military capabilities and reach are far greater than we thought, but they seem to have no interest in the inner planets here, in the non-dominant circle. They have significant resources staged at the edge of the system. It turns out the luminary is a very well-defended circle. We don't know what they are protecting the luminary from, but Magnius believes that any enemy of the Abraxians presents a possible ally for us. The other issue is that while the Abraxians are not that interested in inner planets, they are not oblivious to them either. They seem to have complete administrative control of the 5 moons. Those governments, including the Mashi councils, seem to only exist now as a facade. There is also a doomsday scenario Magnius discovered. It goes like this. Suppose we, in the inner planets, including the dominant circle, cause too much of a problem, like we're trying to do since we didn't understand the situation. In that case, the Abraxians have the technology to destroy Titaio, taking most of the moons and people with it, then to come back in 10,000 cycles and start whatever they are doing over again. Odessa just continued to stare at him with the same irritated look on her face, more waiting for him to stop talking than absorbing the content. Logan, however, had paused, waiting to get a reaction from her. After a bit, she spoke up to fill the silence. "Are you finished? There are more details and other small items, but I think that is a lot of the data. You can see why I wanted you to get the whole picture." Odessa shifted her position. She was not trying to engineer a problem, instead working through how much things had changed during and after the Abraxian attack. "So how does Gax figure into everything?" She motioned to his silhouetted form in the distance. "The Abraxians banished him to Alethea, for his perceived failures to deal with us within the time and resources they had given him. He is here now because he gave us the security codes to the depot on the moon. How can we know he is being honest with us, that he isn't trying to set yet another trap for us to regain his standing? Logan smiled to himself, unable to smile physically. This was his initial concern, and he learned much over the past couple of days. I don't know that we could ever know that, or that it even matters. The resources stored on the moon are extensive and meaningful. I have the inventories and can show you, so why did he give us the access codes? I don't think it matters. Just that us getting them has proved very beneficial, which means, if nothing else, Gax is being very helpful right now. She nodded, as though that made sense. Logan felt this might be the only chance he had for the next part, something he needed to confirm himself. We need to bring E7 into the conversation. Are you okay with that? Sure. Her demeanor had relaxed a little, but still very guarded. The more, the merrier. Logan sent a signal, and E7 walked into view. Odessa realized that she had been standing behind Gax. When E7 approached and stopped, Logan said, "E7, thank you for waiting and for all your hard work. I have some questions. As you know, I wanted to wait until the three of us were together to have this conversation." Odessa perked up a little. The fact Logan had been waiting to include her in the exchange improved her mood considerably. Logan looked to Odessa to confirm she was ready for him to start. Then he looked back to E7. "E7, have your biological memories returned to you?" he asked, jumping to the heart of the matter. He believed he knew most of these details. Still, he wanted to get the information firsthand and allow Odessa to come along on the journey of discovery with him. "No, sir," E7 said, sounding like a normal ethereal. X7's speech patterns had significantly changed as the Magnus consciousness became dominant. "However, I am aware of them, and I believe I know parts of what they contain. But it is a little odd. I have insights into them, but just as datagrams, not as incorporated information into my thought processes. But to be clear, nothing specific. I have general insights to them is all." Odessa spoke up, re-engaging. "What do these insights suggest to you, E7? It is clear that I was General Magnus's second-in-command for a good part of my military career. It is also clear that in that lifetime, I was 100% loyal to him. I had real significant feelings for him, maybe even love. It is not clear. However, what is clear is that I must never access the data directly or go through the process of remembering. I know for certain, if I regain those memories, my loyalties to you will fade away, and my loyalties to Magnus will be complete and absolute." Logan suspected precisely this. "Odessa, my thought is to have E7 work directly with Gax going forward. That will keep her away from Magnus and give us more oversight to what Gax may be doing at any point in time." Odessa thought about it. "I think that is a good place to start. E7, I will confess to you that this situation seems dangerous to me." E7 responded immediately. "I agree with you, ma'am. I am open to safety protocols, but I do not know what they might be. I can tell you that the impression I get from my original biological loyalties is that Magnus earned them, and he held my respect, for what that is worth." Chapter 13, Terra Proper. Magnus returned a complete lunar cycle later with the rebuilt space fleet. Between those ships and materials, the salvage Odessa and Logan had acquired, and the resources found in the Moon Depot, they now held military capabilities that rivaled anything the 5 moons had ever deployed. Lashera was squawking a lot about wanting to leave. Logan handled things by simply telling her no, not right now. Odessa was impressed. It had simply not occurred to her to be authoritative like that. She thought as a leader, she should try and understand and persuade, not dictate and command. E7 had been working with Gax, who turned out to be a wealth of knowledge about the Abraxians and intel about their working in the luminary system. Magnus met him and seemed to like him, which was a relief for Logan, who feared the two might bump heads. Gax was a huge dominant warrior, but he had military discipline and seemed genuinely thankful to have something to do compared to his banishment, however short, on the far-off island. Magnus called a meeting of those he identified as key players. Logan thought Magnus was an interesting character. It was clear that Magnus had a strong sense of self and of purpose. He listened to others and even sought advice more than Logan thought he would, but he made his own decisions and just assumed that he was in charge. Given Magnus controlled a massive space fleet, tens of thousands of combat androids, and the controls and security of the current base on Alethea, Logan didn't dispute that. In the end, Magnus probably really was in charge, independent of any conversation that may be had. They had all gathered on the fleet flagship, the Oldtech carrier. Magnus had christened the ship as Terra Reason. Apparently, the Reason was the name of the vessel of his first official command. Logan confirmed this in the historical data pools through hundreds of independent datagrams. They were all in a large meeting room. The ship bristled with technology and improved aesthetics. You could see the Oldtech origins, but 100 cycles of innovations and improvements shone through. Everything looked hyper-modern. Magnus stood at the front of a large U-shaped table with a huge display screen behind him. In the room seated or standing around the table, depending on their configuration, were Logan, Odessa, Franklin, Kara, E7, Lashera, and Gax. Aaron had been offered a seat but declined. His spirit had been broken with the death of his brother, and he had joined Lashera's group of dissenters who wanted to leave Alethea and return to Maki. There were several of Magnus's ethereal E1 units from the fleet and combat androids in the room. Magnus had an operations prime called A1, who was there standing back to the side of the display. Magnus began talking, slowly pacing back and forth in front of the display as he spoke. Currently behind him on the display was a zoomed-out map of the Luminary system showing different overlays representing a Braxian military deployment. I want to clear up a lot of confusion and provide everyone a clear path forward by the time we finish today. I am also reinstating some military protocols, which I will explain. This meeting today will be the only time I am open to a discussion concerning these new protocols. But I am no dictator, and I do value input and observations as long as they are meaningful and not a waste of my time. You in this room are my primes. As such, it means you are open to challenge for the position from any member of our clan, provided they are a worthy challenger, and that the challenge is made per the posted timetable for promotion opportunities. Kara raised her hand, fuming, staring at Odessa with anger and hatred. Magnus recognized her, and she said without shifting her gaze away from Odessa, "I challenge Odessa for clan leadership." Magnus waved an arm. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Kara. We will get to the actual challenges, but your request is denied. You do not meet the criteria as a worthy challenger. However, since I am clan leader, not Odessa, if you would like to challenge me, I will accept the challenge right here and right now. I do suggest you wait to understand what a challenge involves, however. Also, and I want to make this point to everyone, I picked this group to be my primes. You are the best of what we have access to, but petty squabbling between this group will not be tolerated. We have much more significant and pressing issues. So with all that said, Kara, do you wish to challenge me for leadership? Or would you rather learn what our current situation is and what I have planned for us?" She seemed to think about it longer than required, but after a few moments shook her head no. Magnus acknowledged her withdrawal. "Logan, you are my combat prime. Continue to study and listen. Odessa, you and I have spoken, and you do not wish to be a prime. However, as I told you in private, you are needed. You are my security prime. You have good experience as law enforcement, and you have fair and unclouded judgment. Franklin, you remain our tech prime." Kara, her eyes lit up, excited. Up until now, as Magnus explained each person's role, they looked somber, as if accepting a heavy burden. Kara looked excited at the recognition. "You are our salvage prime. I am impressed with the careful extent I have witnessed on how the technology and machinery are being reused and repurposed. In my review, you have experience in this area." She looked deflated to a degree, but she did not interrupt or complain. Magnus continued. "E7, you are my fleet prime. You are in command of all of the ships in the fleet and assigned as captain of our flagship, Terra Reason." E7 had a feeling of dread flow through her. This sounded like the same role that Thalia, her spirit donor, had been in under Magnus all those cycles ago. But she dared not show her feelings, not now. "Lashera, I want you as my civilian medical prime. Your job is to maintain the health and welfare of the biological members of our clan. And finally, Gax, that leaves you." Magnus turned and looked at Gax directly. Gax had seated himself at the table and had been watching intently so far. Magnus asked him, "What role do you see for yourself here? You are the only true outsider present." Gax leaned forward, no sarcasm as he spoke, even though the words could have been delivered as sarcasm. "I am here to serve, Leader Magnus." He rolled his hand in circles in front of his head in what looked like a Batorian sign of obedience or something close to it. Magnus continued to face Gax. "I know what the others want. I know what they are capable of. But you, Gax, I do not know. You have been an enemy. You have been a friend. Logan speaks highly of you, and he vouched for you. I have studied the datagrams. You were a capable soldier and leader. You made your limited resources seem more formidable than they were. You used skill and cunning alongside strength and resolve." Kara yelled out, "Magnus, you don't know what they did to us. He was part of it. They did horrible things. Awful things." Magnus turned his head without moving any other part of his body. "Kara, you may address me as General or Sir, or if you like, General Sir." The statement hung in the air, and there was a biting edge to it. Kara didn't understand the point Magnus had made. "What does it matter what I call you? You are siding with the Abraxians. You are siding with the people that killed thousands of us. This thing sitting here." She was becoming frantic, losing her train of thought. "He is going to trick you, trick all of us. I bet he is even now working on getting us all killed." "Kara," Magnus said, his voice softer than it had been. "What?" she returned, ready to argue and disrupt the proceedings until she got her way. "I accept your reinstated challenge for my leadership position." "No!" E7 screamed, rushing to stand in front of Kara, putting herself between her and Magnus. E7 turned to Kara, yelling loudly, "Withdraw your challenge now, child. Do it." Kara stood up, pushing past E7. "No, I do not withdraw my challenge this time. I would make a better leader than any of you, especially him," she yelled, indicating Magnus. "He tricked me. He is betraying us all by working with the Abraxians. He wants to use the machines on us again. General, she does not understand what she is saying." E7 moved to stand between the two again, putting her hand and arm around Kara to force her behind her. "The challenge has been made, and the opportunity to withdraw it has passed." Magnus did not seem happy, but he did seem resolute. Then he turned his head to his side as though a thought just occurred to him. "E7, ethereal, a machine with a soul. How would you know about ancient maritime customs like this?" E7 searched herself. She did not have direct knowledge. It was her memories leaking into her processing. There may be no way around avoiding them. There may be one way, some part of her realized. "I challenge you for clan leadership, General. I am worthy, where we both know this child is not." Magnus stared straight at E7. "Fine, automaton. We have a lot to cover and there is much planning to do. However, we need to resolve this first. The old ways work. They provide a solid foundation for us all to stand on." He moved away from the table to an open area between it and the large display wall. "I accept your challenge. You have this opportunity to retract it, or we shall hold the promotion ceremony now." E7 walked over and stood opposite Magnus. Hand to hand, full ethereal capabilities. "We cannot leave this room," she stated to him, knowing the ritual. Logan stepped forward. "You two are going to fight? This is the stupidest thing I have ever seen." Yes, Kara has become a loudmouth. Kara started to object, but Odessa kept her from interjecting. "But we can deal with it. We don't need our two most valuable pieces of technology killing each other." Magnus and E7 circled each other, ignoring Logan. Magnus made a motion, and A1, the combat android standing near the back of the room, stepped over and blocked Logan from interfering. A1 made another motion. A transparent barrier materialized between the combatants and everyone else around the table. As Magnus and E7 circled each other, Magnus said to her, "You move in a familiar way." He could not place what she reminded him of. E7 said back with no emotion, "Let's get this over with." "You have the honors," he said, assuming a defensive hand-to-hand fighting position. E7 sprung with the initiative, moving instantly, as fast as the ethereal frame allowed. She attacked with her left hand open and right hand in a fist. Moving in a straight line, holding her left hand in reserve, Thrusting the right fist forward, she moved her feet in coordination, targeting Magnus's center mass. Magnus anticipated the move and countered by stepping out of the way and pushing her past him with an extended arm. E7 stumbled forward and fell. Magnus looked down at her, but from a distance he was no fool. "Your designation is E7, is that correct?" he said as she stood back up. "Yes," she said, resuming her ready position. "What are you fighting me for?" Magnus asked. "There is no logic in defending the female Kara. She holds little value, and my actions gave her every opportunity to behave rationally. She made a choice. I am fighting you because I fear what will happen if I join you," E7 thought to herself, experiencing fear at the idea of submitting to him. To Magnus, she said, "My reasons are my own." Just before she finished her statement, she sped forward again, seizing the initiative a second time. She feigned the same attack, but this time bringing her left arm around and her right leg forward. If successful, she would deliver a brutal takedown, slamming him over her leg and onto the ground, where a dozen different finishing moves could be used to end the contest. Again, though, he somehow anticipated her move, stepping the other way, bringing his arm around, pushing her off balance and onto the ground, this time with more force. The impact with the ground was jarring. E7 was momentarily stunned. She stayed down longer this time, then slowly rose. "Automaton," Magnus said to her, talking formally, "I offer you a chance to withdraw your challenge one last time." He sensed something was wrong here. The attacks E7 was using would be devastating and advanced against an average combatant. But to him, she was using basic attack moves that he taught to his junior officers. A brutal fighting style he developed himself a long time ago, adapted from several different military techniques as well as his own experiences. How can this automaton know my teachings? Who is in there? Flashed across Magnus's thoughts. I need to make sure this unit survives the contest so I can get to the bottom of this. E7 extended her arm bracings. The blades flashed out, wrapping her arms in deadly metal. Magnus saw them. "Automaton, retract those bracings. Do it now. That is an order." E7 stood defiant in front of him, cold fear running through her. "If I cannot beat him, I must have him kill me. If I survive and my memories return, I will be lost forever," she thought, as she assumed a ready fighting stance. The new stance was different from the unarmed fighting position, her arms now extended high. They bent at the elbows, blades forward, the maximum area of the blades facing her enemy. Someone yelled, "Stop! What are you two doing?" E7 only partially heard, lost in her thoughts and manufacturing rage to spur her final assault. Magnus watched her. He knew exactly what she would do, the new fighting stance giving her away. He had taught it many times. Rage swelled in him also, but it was not manufactured rage. No matter who or what he was fighting now, drawing deadly weapons changed the context of the struggle. He had not risen to and survived as a military general through suffering life-threatening attacks, casually. "This will be the end of you," Magnus warned, activating his arm bracings and repositioning his stance. "Not today," E7 returned, launching into her charge. She spun forward, propelling herself quickly, moving the blades high, then low at the last minute, then high again. Magnus countered the low assault, moving counter when she struck him across the chest, her arm blade digging deep into the hole of it. The wound would have near instantly killed a biological. It was a devastating, destructive assault, E7 using a new finishing move, different from Magnus's teachings. It worked brilliantly. But neither Magnus nor E7 were biologicals. They were machines built for exploration and service, and also combat, both refitted over the past cycle for war given the situation on Alethea. Magnus staggered back, parrying off follow-up blows from E7 that would have done him in. She was pushing the advantage, frantically spinning and beating down with her deadly weapons in a long, coordinated series of attacks. Magnus blocked her assault, finally seeing the pattern. He knew he did not have long before another blow landed, and it would be the end of him. He timed a defensive parry with E7's motions and constant strikes, mustering his strength and inner resolve. Bringing both his blades up with as much force as he could deliver, up under either swinging arm right at the shoulder joint, blade edges facing up. There was a flash of sparks and a jolting pop of electricity. Both of E7's arms clattered to the ground, spinning and thrashing about, the electrical signals controlling their movement in the attack still activating frantic motion. E7 let out a blood-curdling wail. "Nu!" she yelled as she fell to her knees. Magnus looked over to the group outside of the transparent barrier. They were staring back in confusion and horror. He motioned, and the transparent barrier filled in, becoming a wall that no one could see through. He and E7 were now alone. "General, please, kill me. Please finish this. We both know I was insubordinate. I do not deserve mercy. I am owed final punishment." Magnus retracted the arm bracings and slowly walked around E7, studying her. "Who are you?" he asked after a time, his voice soft. "I don't know," E7 said quickly. She knew he would know it was a lie. Her fear was subsiding. She was resigning herself, knowing where things would end up. "I can help you," he said, walking up to her as she shook. Some from the wounds, some from fear of the inevitable, some from a new growing excitement on the work she knew they would do together. Magnus laid his hand gently on her head. At the moment of contact, he sent the command to release her memories. They flooded over her in an instant. They were exactly what she had feared they would be. But that was before. Now she knew who she was. She knew what she was capable of. Magnus removed his hand as he stood in front of her again, helping her to her feet. She looked at him for a long time. "I love you, you know," she said after a while. Magnus put his hand to her cheek, nodding his head. "We have many worlds to conquer, you and I." Thalia pushed into his hand. "It is going to be glorious," she said as the two finally embraced. The end. The Earth 50,000 BC story will continue in the next glorious series of books and short stories set for release in 2024.